Welcome to the Pancake Parlay, episode 92. I'm your host, The Don, and I'm here with Chatters. How are you today?
I'm good, Don. How are you?
I'm good. Today we're going to be talking about Oscars and, movies and our top 10 movies of 2019. Remember, this is our pop culture, podcast that we talk about movies, TV, comics, games, whatever you want to do. All that type of good stuff. Let's just jump into our first what do you call it? Like a news item and it just pretty much broke out right now, is that the Disney Aladdin live action film is getting a sequel. And I didn't mind the live action Aladdin movie. I thought it was okay. They added maybe few extra things for the live action release. I just thought it was just an okay film. Really good performance, Will Smith from the genie, and yeah, I guess they're getting a sequel, and maybe they'll do what their direct to video route, what they did for the animated stuff, and then you'll have like the 99 Nights or whatever it was. But yeah, could be
Yeah,
interesting.
100 isn't it like the 99 I don't know, themes or
Themes, nights,
something.
I don't know. It's something along those lines, but I do remember watching that, like the
Movie.
the direct to video one, because I think there was like three or
It's pretty
four.
good. I liked it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there were a couple that came out. But yeah, it's very interesting. I think like you said, well, I mean, I didn't like the movie because I thought it was like kind of like a vastly inferior version of the original film. It's like if you had a kid, like obviously these are kind of designed ultimately to either kind of milk the original people who kind of grew up watching the movie, right? Like us,
Like
and made
literally
in,
us.
yeah, literally us, like made in '92, right? From memory. And yeah, like this movie essentially represents more of this kind of lazy rehash, triple dipping, double dipping that Disney is doing with all their live action films of original titles. It seems like the new Mulan movie seems to be the most different out of all these Disney films that they're doing of a live action variety, since there's no Mushu, there's going to be no singing, there's some kind of ninja bird woman in that
I haven't watched
Mulan
any of the
movie.
trailers, but okay, Ninja Bird Woman, cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, like yeah, I don't know, like I was like, oh, that's not a character from the original movie, but cool. Like, but it sucks that it doesn't have any of the cool music, and it doesn't have Eddie Murphy back as what is it, Mushu
Mushu,
or whatever.
and that's the thing, because I think everyone's just being like, oh well, he wasn't in the original like folktale of Mulan. I'm just like, what do you think? Any of these Disney films like 100% follow the folklores of each freaking thing?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of the princesses like die or something in the original Brothers Grimm movies. So, sorry, books or whatever. So, but yeah, ultimately, like having a bit of a change is like a good thing here and there. Like there's nothing wrong with getting another actor to play like Mushu, for example. Like we had Will Smith, play a genie, and he's probably the only good thing in the Aladdin movie. Everything else about it is pretty trash. But it's kind of stock standard that it'd get a sequel. It made a lot of money. Guy Ritchie is more. Like they don't know whether he's returning, but like I mean, chances are he probably will. And yeah, like Will Smith is producing. It has everything that Disney requires: the known property, star power, to get people's asses to the seats, right? Like you kind of compare it with our next story, which is quite important, given that Will Smith is semi-related to it. Birds of Prey. I don't know if you heard about how bad the movie is unfortunately doing.
I
Um,
have heard. I heard it basically broke like 33 million, basically on its weekend. And basically it's the lowest grossing or lowest box office result for a DC film, and that even includes apparently Green Lantern.
yeah.
That's a good thing to put in perspective, I guess.
Oh yeah. That's the thing that's crazy, right? Like it even did worse than Green Lantern. And the thing is, I've even read things online, and people have said the movie's not particularly bad, uh, but it's just that nobody wants to go watch this film. And why is that the case? Well, I think it's just like a lot of the marketing. Um,
Well,
you
to be
know,
fair,
like
the trailers weren't that great, even the
trailers
beginning.
weren't that great either. But that's the thing. Okay, so like the movie that you have to directly compare this particular movie to is Suicide Squad, right? Like without a doubt. And the thing with Suicide Squad is it had Will Smith in it randomly, right? I didn't think Will Smith was like a good cast for Deadshot, but ultimately he plays the role that he's supposed to, right? Like he's just kind of good guy, but he's good at shooting guns, I guess. But it doesn't have not the same character in the comics, right? And then you also had Margot Robbie, who was like kind of just came off her famous debut. Was it her debut in Wolf of Wall Street? Or
She
the
was
one
like
that
in
she's
Wolf of
most
Wall
famous
Street,
for?
and I think basically she was in focus with Will Smith as well.
Sure, there
Yeah,
was that. But she was more well known for Wolf of Wall Street, right?
pretty much.
Especially
Yeah, I think
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
think that's what really put her on the map, and I think as soon as and then they're just like, oh yeah, let's cast her. It's pretty much like straight after that.
And look, I'm all for supporting Aussie actors and actresses kind of breaking out into Hollywood. I actually only found out like I think maybe like after like the announcement of Suicide Squad and her being like picked to be Harley Quinn that she was an Australian and she was like on Neighbours or some shit like
Yep,
that. I was
because
like,
I
oh,
do
okay.
remember because I did watch Neighbors. So
Yeah, see, honestly, I'm one of the people who never grew up watching Neighbours and Home and Away. Like, it was just there, and it was just like, you see, it's like I have commitment issues enough with certain movies and TV shows. I'd need to watch the entire thing to understand Neighbours, and that shit like goes on for way too long. And it's more popular in the UK than it is in Australia,
yeah,
allegedly.
you can definitely feel the UK influence in Neighbors because it's just like, oh, who was like, yeah, fine, let's just put these characters in or let's do this thing. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is big in
exactly.
there.
But yeah, with Birds of Prey, uh, there isn't a lot of star power other than Margot Robbie.
Like you
Um,
got Mary Elizabeth Winstead, which I always liked, because she's like Ramona Flowers and everything. But like, yeah, she is not a like a list
big
celebrity,
name.
or she
You
doesn't
know,
have the star power, you know.
who I found out is in Suicide Squad that I didn't know
Um,
um, was someone pretty famous. Well, not famous, but has a very famous brother. Jury Smollett Bell, who plays Black Canary, is the sister of Jussie Smollett, who
uh-huh.
is the guy who's I think currently getting sued by New York for more or less faking like a fake hate crime against himself.
Yep,
I
yeah, I
wasn't
do
aware
remember
that they
that.
were I wasn't aware that they were related until I saw like, oh wait, he's got a very similar. She's got a very similar name, but it just says Bell. I was like, oh no, couldn't be a relation. But then she's related to him. So yeah, that's really awkward to have your brother kind of in the limelight in that regard. But yeah, like this is the thing with the movie. I've heard like mixed things about it. Like it's not like really bad. It's just but yeah, and even if you look at obviously, we can't always trust, what they say on Rotten Tomatoes these days. But it's in the 80s as it would be. It's actually, I think it's more fresh than the Joker, right?
Yes, which is
Um,
like, what even is life? What like at that point you basically just can't even trust Rotten Tomatoes. Like it's not even a good aggregate.
and it's a bit well, yeah. I guess you can't really trust him given that I'm pretty sure Warner Brothers or like their parent company technically owns Rotten Tomatoes, from my understanding. But that doesn't mean they kind of do a lot of lip service to like all the big movies. Like look at Rise of Skywalker, right? Like all of those kind of major reviewers have given it like a really big rating, even though it should nowhere near uh, get the score that it currently does have. But yeah, with Birds of Prey opening at 33 million, and then also being like the worst DCEU film, like DC's kind of released a few like bad films, like nobody's denying that. But this one doing so badly, it seems to be more of a product of bad marketing, and I think ultimately is just kind of a continuation of I guess these mistakes of kind of marketing certain films towards I guess like a general like kind of action audience, right? Because here's one thing that I don't know if you saw, they actually changed the movie's title in cinemas. Did you hear about that one?
I did. So what is it?
Yeah.
Because it used to be what
Okay, so
Harley
so
Quinn and the like. What is it? Birds of Prey
yeah,
and the
this is
Emancipation of Harley Quinn. Was that basically the title?
yeah, so the title is Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, right? That's the name. Um, and it got changed to Harley Quinn Birds of Prey. That's it. Like so it went from this ridiculously long title, which to be fair, I actually didn't mind the title per se because I think like that was supposed to be the point that it was like this ridiculously long title. But I think it should have been one of those things where it shouldn't have been in the actual name of the movie itself, if that makes sense. Like they should have just called it Birds of Prey, and then
Yeah,
like
the
as a
Fantasia,
joke, it's like
whatever the fuck it's called. Yeah.
yeah. Like you see that all the time with like certain like music albums, right? Like they'll call it like this, but then like the actual like it actually stands for like X, Y, and Z. So it's like a really long title, but they just refer it to as this. You do that with songs. You do that with like hell people's names sometimes. But then now they've just because I don't know. Like it maybe it seems. Here's the thing. When I look at something like a DC movie and a lot of these kind of pop culture films, I always do it from the lens of somebody who's very hyper aware of what these characters are for the most part. And given that we've been obviously reviewing movies for a couple of years now, we kind of have become more hyper aware of like certain things, even if we didn't necessarily want to. I know it's been the case for me. But with something like Birds of Prey, like yeah, I could definitely understand like if somebody goes into it, and it's like, what the fuck is Birds of Prey? Whereas the new title is Harley Quinn. It's like, oh, we know who Harley Quinn is because she was really famous in Suicide Squad. So yeah, so I look as somebody. I'm not somebody who's completely ignorant of films. So like, it could very much be the case that yeah, that actually makes a pretty significant decision for certain people to be like, hey, like Harley Quinn, I'll go watch that film. Versus what's Birds of Prey? It kind of reminds me of like that. I forget. I think it was like I forget their name, like, but the people who made Bioshock, and
Oh, what,
essentially,
Irrational Games.
yeah, and when they were trying to market Bioshock Infinite, they had like two titles and sorry, like kind of cover art for the game, and one had like it looked all like kind of decrepit and like old timey and stuff. It looked like a really cool fan art, and then versus oh well, here's just a dude with a gun on the front cover, and turns out the one that did better was the one with the front of the cover because in the end that kind of stuff ends up selling for people who are either like on the borderline or aren't educated in like what a game is about, whether you be like a parent or whether you're just a guy who just wants to buy a game and you don't go on online to look at what you're purchasing, right? It's the same thing for Cyberpunk 2077. Like if you look at that game, it's just a dude, it's just a guy on the front of the cover, like rather than I don't know some cool cyberpunk art where it's like someone's face half off and you see like I don't know the robo parts underneath. There isn't
It
there
just
probably
doesn't
is.
sell.
Yeah, like and that's the thing. It all comes down to a marketing perspective in terms of how you're able to get people, and ultimately it seems to be that the DC basically has panicked and changed the rating of the film. Sorry, the name of the film to Harley Quinn Birds of Prey. I think the other thing that people have been also blaming the movie for doing bad in is the fact that it's a R-rated film, but we've already seen that Deadpool has proven that R-rated comic book films that are comedy focused can make heaps of money
Yeah,
and be
exactly. Like, no,
R-rated.
because like I've heard a lot of things and reviews of this film, that it basically is it's trying to mimic also Deadpool as well. So it is very close
Comparison.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna say, yeah, Deadpool works really well. It always makes money so far. Even stuff like normal R-rated stuff, like something like a Joker or even Logan, makes quite a bit of money as well. So it's just clearly
Yeah.
all becoming down to like something like the star power as well as the marketing really, basically pushes stuff over the line. And I feel, and that's the thing. It's like it came out like mid-February, like early Feb, which is there's no competition up until this week, which is now we have Sonic, but that's really it. Like there was no competition that it was opening towards. And we'll basically see how the Sonic does, but I feel like it's going to get more people going to it. So Birds of Prey only really lasted 1 week because it had no one else to compete with. And that's what's
And
probably going to happen.
especially, yeah, and especially given that we've got Valentine's Day weekend as well. That's apparently a very like influential thing, given that there's not a lot of big kind of competing movies to fight against the film. We might give it a bit of a second win, but we'd have to see a little bit of like the box office takes, like maybe after the weekend passes. But yeah, like you look at something like the first Deadpool movie, it made like 130 in its opening like kind of weeks, and then you had Joker make 90 million, right? Like even DC, like you can't even say DC can't make a good R-rated film because they did, recently, very very recently, and it was actually about technically Harley Quinn's boyfriend, right? And yeah, it's an absolute shame, but it seems to be this pattern that I'm seeing with certain films that are coming out, and it's like it's supposed to target a an audience that kind of enjoy these kind of comic movies or action-packed movies, but then they just kind of fumble up the marketing or have a pretty like I guess segregating tone in terms of what they want to do and promote the film, right? Because the films that come to mind is you've got Harley Quinn, obviously, and you've got Charlie's Angels, which I actually recently watched. It's and you know what? Not that bad, to be honest. Not that bad.
Not that bad.
Not that bad. And maybe I can do a quick review of it while we're on it. But there's also Terminator Dark Fate, right? And you've seen Terminator Dark, correct? Yeah. And I think ultimately, like these films, I remember like when these films kind of came out, and including Birds of Prey, there's a lot of kind of promotion talking about this film is a film for women. And if you're a guy, don't you like
you can't watch it, you can't enjoy it.
Can't, or like and well, here's the thing, right? All these movies, they're all action oriented. And especially with something like Birds of Prey, as a Harley Quinn Birds of Prey. Sorry, I should call it by its current name. It's a comic book movie. The vast majority of people who read comic books are men.
And I think
consume. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just about to say. I think I saw a report that said the opening demographic. I don't know how they got the data, but they basically said the demographics of the people watching Harley Quinn on that weekend was literally like I think 57% male. So it's like
it was like a 50-40 split, right?
Yeah, so they can't really get away from that fact that they might target a certain demographic, but a certain demographic likes them more.
Like but that's the thing, like from a business perspective, it makes a lot of sense to kind of target a new audience base, right? Like because that's the reason why like we're seeing a lot, especially like in a lot of Western markets, like a lot of films that have a lot of like diverse casting is a way to kind of excel and expand the kind of money that you'll get from a film. Like this is part of the reason why you see like all of the Fast and the Furious films, like they just have like an ever expanding roster of people that are in the films. It's like, oh, that guy was an enemy in the last movie, well now he's a main character in this movie. But they have like big popularity within the Latino community, big following within white community, African American community. They all went and watched those films when they came out. But that's the thing, like that follows like a pretty important rule. Like I think it's like the 4 quadrant rule, right? It's like you have your older men, younger men, older women, younger women. So they fall into like these categories. And the thing is, a lot of people who kind of fall into like the demographic of watching like action movies, there's like a very small minority of women moviegoers that go and watch these kind of films. Like maybe they'll go watch it with their boyfriends, or maybe they'll go watch it if they're like a big fan of this kind of genre, but they still make up the minority. But yeah, and ultimately that's what you see with something like, Birds of Prey, and the other movies that we mentioned. And I think that's probably what led to like a lack of people wanting to go and watch these films, is because studios have pivoted towards the direction of, oh, we're going to make this so that, okay, so here's the thing. They make it with the intention of, oh, well, we're going to get the male demographic to go watch these films. So then let's just hyper focus on the quadrants that we can try and get to watch this film instead. Does that make sense? Because it's more like, okay, we've got two of
like
the
we already got
quadrants
these in the
down.
bag, so let's try to focus on, not the people who would probably already see it anyways.
There's no point focusing on the people who are gonna watch it. They're gonna watch it. But I think that ultimately leads to the film suffering in terms of quality as well. And it's such a shame because, like I said, like I'll just give a quick review of like Charlie's Angels. Like, it's actually not that bad. Like, they actually have some pretty like nifty action scenes. Sure, not everything's like flows really well, and you can tell that maybe with like certain cuts of the film that like certain actresses weren't there for the particular fight scene that they're in, and that's when the body double is in and stuff. But I think like for the most part, the film isn't like as bad as I thought it was going to be. I think Ella, I forget her name. I'll look it up really quickly. But she basically plays Jane, and she's like a former MI6 agent, and she's like the best character in the film. Like, she's basically like supposed to be like a stoic character, and she's like a former MI6, like I mentioned, and she just like runs and guns and like beats the shit out of people. It's excellent.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and then you have like Kirsten Stewart. Kirsten Stewart's character is like a little bit extra. She's kind of like supposed to be like this kind of quirky, rebellious character.
I can see rebellious character, but I would never suspect Kirsten Stewart to be quirky.
Yeah, well, trust me, it's like, usually when you think Kirsten Stewart, it's like, I think, what is it, Twilight or whatever? Like,
I think of being permanently tied.
Yeah, permanently tied. No, but she's not like that. She's very like, she's pretty energetic in this film. So maybe if for that reason alone, you can go watch Charlie's Angels. And then there's, I think, who else is in it? There's like another, Naomi Scott, who I think
is in Power Rangers, Jasmine? And she's Jasmine.
Yes. Sorry, all right. So yeah. Sorry, and she was also in Power Rangers. Yeah,
yes.
Her character.
Remember that film, people.
Yeah. Naomi Scott. She basically plays like the fish out of water, like almost new recruit of Charlie's Angels, right?
So it's like an easy way to explain, like, this is what the agent does, and this is what this does,
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like, I watched it and I was like, oh, they actually had some pretty good ideas. Like, they kind of connect it. It's technically a direct sequel to the Charlie's Angels movies, but then it also is a sequel to like the TV series, like the original TV series. They kind of explain it as all of these movies and TV series. It's all happening in like the one timeline, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Right?
Where it's kind of like the whole James Bond thing, where it's a double O. You can easily kind of like
basically with the 2019 film, it basically explains like, Charlie's Angels, like, it's an international spy agency, right? Like, this is just a sect of like the Charlie's Angels like organization, so to speak. I forget what they originally was called. I'm not very deep within my Charlie's Angels lore. Yeah, like, especially the TV series. The first, I really like the first and second film. I grew up watching those, so I'm a little bit biased. They probably don't hold up, and that's what I'm saying. That's why I don't want to be too harsh on this film because I think it actually has some pretty good ideas. It's just like, yeah, like some of the and action scenes, right? Like there's some parts of the film that the movie does really well. It's just a shame that a lot of the uh, writing can be pretty cringe and pretty like heavy-handed, and the plot is just like very much like because they have to go steal the big kind of MacGuffin in the film is about this device that's able to that's kind of like a Google Home, right? That you can like that fundamentally adapts into any electronic system, but then it could also be used as an EMP that can affect people and cause them to have heart attacks and shit. And I just
Gotcha.
kind of thinking like, and the whole premise is like, oh, the what is it, Naomi Scott's character, she develops it, and oh well, yeah, nobody wants to and she knows that there's a flaw, but then the character doesn't take any steps to try and
Fix the
you know
flaw or get rid of it.
well,
Yeah.
no. She does want to fix the flaw, but the authorities above her don't want to listen to her, and it's like, well, yeah, I get it. It's like it's supposed to be the premise of the film. It's just you could have done it in a better way. Anyways, point is, Charlie's Angels. It's okay.
Charlie's
Maybe
Angels
it's
is
not worth.
okay, and probably Birds of Prey is maybe less than okay.
Yeah, like, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is what I think. I think that both of the look, I haven't seen what is it, the new Terminator film, but I feel like it's probably like a similar kind of thing. Like, it's not like the worst film in the world. It's just the way that they've decided to go about writing and the execution of the film, and then subsequently the marketing leads to an alienation of a very significant portion of
And
the
probably
market that
its
would.
main core fan base, I would say.
Yeah, the main. Well, yeah, especially if you think like Terminator in particular, right? Um, I don't know about Charlie's Angels. That might have like maybe a
I got a feeling there's not really fans of Charlie's Angels. Charlie's Angels is just such a
well,
weird
but I
property, and even then, I feel like the what early 2000s movies was very much a parody of Charlie's Angels itself, as far as I know, because I think Charlie's Angel, like essentially, it was kind of excuse to be like, let's look at sexy women do some cool shit. And I feel like
yeah.
those 2000 films knew exactly what that was, and they just played with it. That's why it's goofy, and that's why
Oh
it
yeah,
it kind of has a good
exactly.
time about it. And I feel like in whatever this new
But
Charlie's
but
Angels was, they had a particular tone where like, nah, let's make this serious. Like, let's actually take
well,
this
here's the
seriously.
thing. I honestly I don't think the original Charlie's Angels TV series was all like I remember seeing it here and there like on TV because sometimes they'd show an odd episode here and there, and like it didn't take itself super seriously either, in the sense that yeah, like essentially they knew that okay, yeah, we're just having an excuse to have these what is it, these female spies dress up in like obviously of the time supposed to be like outfits that are kind of out there and you know fancy, right? That's essentially
It
what it's
actually kind
supposed
of
to be.
reminds me of
With this,
that cartoon. Remember Totally Spies?
oh yeah, Totally Spies was the shit.
It's basically kind of the same thing.
I feel like there's more guys that watch Totally Spies
Yeah, I
because
like
that
Totally
show was
Spies.
fucking dope.
Actually I watch Winx Club. If you remember that,
I
it's
never watched Winx
the
Club,
fairy
but
version. Yeah.
apparently there's a live action Winx Club coming out,
God damn, like
allegedly.
they have to make everything live action, don't they?
Well, yeah, because I think like one of the you see the only see I only know this very niche information because I watch what is it, the Sabrina TV series, right? So like one of the weird sisters, you know how like there's like those three sisters,
Yeah, they all
but
kind
there's
of look the
one.
same. Those ones.
Well, they don't. To be honest, they don't look the same at all. Like one of them's Asian, one of them's white, and one
Yeah, but
black.
I know what you mean. Like they kind of like they dress the same. If I remember
Oh
correctly.
yeah. Sure. Yeah, they do kind of dress the same. But yeah, the redhead, the she ends up like dying, and I was like, oh, so they just ended up straight up killing her. But then it's like it gets explained, like, oh, well, from when you look at it from an outside perspective, like she never gets credited, like in the opening credits. Like they credit the other weird sister, the other two weird sisters separately. But even like how it's all in cartoon, like the kind of comic book style, they don't credit her. And like allegedly, it's like part of her contract that she could kind of leave whatever season she wanted to, and she's going to be in the new Winx Club TV live action TV series. Yeah, well, I
There was like a boy version of the Winx Club. Yeah, either way, it's gonna be a very cheesy, thing, and I'm very hyped for it actually.
yeah, well, there you go. But yeah, so I think the main problem is like the isolation of like a very core audience that would traditionally go and watch these films. And this is what I was saying. Like I'm not talking about like Charlie's Angels as a terms of like the like a hardcore demographic that watches exclusively their content. I mean more of what would traditionally be the kind of people who would watch these films. And I think it would probably be mixed, right? Like with something like Charlie's Angels.
Well, yeah, and I
But
think
like
Birds of
because of
Prey, but that's the thing. Birds of Prey is purely based off a comic book, and but that's the thing. You think like the Harley Quinn character, I think, yeah, really did blow up. Not even before Suicide Squad. So
oh,
then,
definitely.
yeah, you can and that's, I think they definitely try to market this Birds of Prey film with Harley in the center, and it just didn't work, just because of just who they were trying to target. And
But I think I
just,
think I think ultimately like there wasn't a lot of big names in it as well. And I think like even for me, the way I looked at the film, I was like, man, like none of the characters look anything like the characters in the comic. Cassandra Cain, which is like the little Asian kid, like she's supposed to be like a fucking badass, and like yeah, she's like second to none. Like in it, like a lot of people want her to come back as Batgirl. That's how much they like her character in the comic, right? Essentially, she's supposed to be the daughter of Lady Shiva, who is like the number one martial artist in the DC universe, like even better than Batman, Ra's al Ghul, all that shit. She fucking won ups him, and and she's supposed to be the daughter of her.
mm,
So for me, I'm like, well, doesn't look like a fucking ninja in the
don't look like a ninja to me.
movie. It doesn't look like a ninja in the movie. She is like once we actually go watch it, but like yeah, and then we've got
You got Huntress,
Canary.
which just doesn't have anything that looks like Huntress. It just looks like a girl who kills things.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's the problem. Like, especially since I'm kind of a little bit spoiled because I grew up watching, in my 20s, like the Arrow TV series, which only recently wrapped up, right? And you had the Black Canaries in like almost like several different iterations, and we kind of only get like a version of it. Apparently, she does have her scream, so that's a thing. But yeah, it's one of those things where yeah, even I don't like. I would go watch like DC films, and I don't want to watch this film. So that kind of goes to show that like, yeah, I'm not really super interested in it, and I typically, would have been otherwise. But yeah, look, maybe I'll watch it. Maybe if it's like on like if there's some discount tickets or whatever. But yeah, I'm gonna be watching Sonic, so that's the thing.
Yeah, the
I don't
Sonics.
know if you saw. Did you see how like on Twitter or like some kind of there was like some review bombing of like the Sonic movie, of like these bot operated ones. And they were like,
Is this actually a
Sonic,
conspiracy theory, like a Russian
I
conspiracy theory of
not
bots?
not I don't know. I don't know about Russians, but like essentially like there's all these like kind of copy paste comments and reviews for the Sonic movie, and they're all like, "Oh, this movie is really bad. Like, oh, it's X, Y, and Z. Go watch Harley Quinn instead." And I was like, that's really weird.
That's very specific.
Yeah, it's like why? Yeah, and it's really strange because it's like none of these two movies aren't like competing for the same kind of
Audience
I guess.
demographic, like what Birds of Prey is supposed to be kind of like an adult orientated movie. Well, it's like Sonic is like basically all ages, especially for kids, that whole thing.
Yeah, it's really strange. So yeah, like seriously, look, whether it's bots or whether they're real accounts, like I'm not too sure. But like, it's just really weird that there is like this kind of I don't know, movement against like hating on Sonic movie. Like might be bad. I don't
Well,
know.
to be
But
honest,
yeah,
there is a movement for hating furries, that's for sure.
well, yeah, there's that. But look, I'll read you and like from like 5 different accounts on. I believe these are on Twitter, right? So it says, I took my husband and 2 sons to go see hashtag Sonic movie and was appalled to hear homophobic slurs used throughout the movie. Luckily, hashtag Birds of Prey was showing in the next room, and my family had a much better experience. So, did this person like just get up and like go to another
It
screening
sounds
for a
fake
movie?
and staged to me.
Yeah. Like this is what I'm saying. So there's three of the comments like are exactly the same, but it's a different user. And then the hashtag Sonic movie was dull, boring, and lifeless. The bad CGI was distracting. The jokes didn't land, especially with the villain. The whole plot was very cliched. I'm truly disappointed. I'll be taking my boys to see Birds of Prey, though. They're very excited, and so am I. Like, I don't know. It seems like a lot of astroturfing. I don't know if you've ever heard the term before.
What I would assume it is just basically being like, I'm gonna take something and then basically promote something else. It basically just says, oh, I'm gonna review this one thing, but I'm gonna compare it to something else that I want people to see instead. You know?
Yeah. I mean, look, we see it all the time with like, whether they're artificial accounts or whether they're real account people review bombing something. It's just very interesting that there's this kind of dichotomy between two otherwise unrelated movies is all. But yeah, that's the case for
Either
Lego
way,
movies, I guess.
that's
Yeah,
the Birds of Prey / Sonic drama.
yeah.
Let's close the book on that chapter, and let's just move on to more controversial stuff, the Oscars, because everyone loves rich people getting awards for things.
Yeah, I mean, look, people might who've been listening might remember that I went on a rant about how bad the Oscars are and that they're basically a bunch of, I don't know, I guess Hollywood elites kind of patting each other on the back for movies that are usually really shit. And before we were talking, and I was like, man, I don't even remember exactly why I was so like fired up about it. But then we talked about it, and it was literally because there were just a bunch of like, I don't know, like
Bad films.
bad films, meh films. Like I know you liked what was it, Green Book and
Yeah, Green
Roma,
Book's
right?
alright. Like it won Best Picture. It's okay. I wouldn't say it's Oscar worthy. You know what I mean? Like I
Right.
felt like in general, I felt like last year there was nothing really outstanding that was like, oh my god, that's like 100% an Oscar film. You know?
hmm And yeah, and so whereas this year there was a lot more better films, but as they kind of had the official numbers come out for this year's Oscars, apparently it's the lowest rated Oscars of all time, which is kind of crazy that it's just an all-time low. Can you imagine? They even had Eminem at this one.
Eminem, and they had what is it? Everyone's favorite Billie Eilish or whatever. So they had it reminds me of I think it was like at least 2007 I think, when they tried to get a hit new crowd to watch the Oscars, and that was like when they had James Franco and Anne Hathaway, and they were completely like James Franco was completely stoned, and it was like one of the most disastrous like hosts
Was
of
that
all
for
time.
was that for 2018? Or was
No, no,
that
no,
for...
no. That was like 2007, I think. 2008
Oh,
or something like
oh.
that. Because I do remember that was like everyone's just like, yeah, the Oscars are just stupid. Because yeah, I just and it feels like they try to do that for this one. I think there was no host, like official host for this year, because I
Well,
think
yeah,
that
because I
because
think
Kevin Hart got
yeah,
axed for something that
yeah,
he said
exactly.
10
So I
years
think
ago, which is really stupid. And the funny part of it that this all is that Ricky Gervais was basically making fun of not only that situation, but I like it how he does the Golden Globes, and like the Golden Globes are just like, yeah, sure, who cares, we'll get the most controversial guy on there and just make some jokes, and it's better
yeah,
for it.
yeah. I mean, people watched it. I don't know if they watched it more, probably not. But like, it's one of those things that is just kind of funny that they need to kind of have somebody to host a show, give a diatribe in order to watch it, right? But in the end, again, it's going to be a bunch of rich people telling us, like, and again, like, he kind of predicted it. Like, what is it? Like, Brad Pitt went up and talked about something, or I think was it like American political stuff. Like, if you're actually watching the show to talk about movies. Like even I think what is it? Joaquin Phoenix, when he accepted his award, like he was talking about, like he kind of lost me. I watched that, I watched his acceptance speech, and it's like, okay, yeah, cool, like totally with you, Joaquin. And then he's like talking about cows, and but then he kind of like saved it with his quote from his brother and stuff. So yeah, like again, people want to come in to find out like who won awards, and I don't know if it was the case this year, or like with certain award show how they're like kind of they give out awards for like the categories that aren't as important, and they do it like off screen or off on the breaks and stuff like that, but then there's all this kind of stuff in the middle nobody gives a shit about.
Yeah, I feel like it needs to be like an hour and a half type of thing, because like they do that, but on top of that, they have so many awards that no one.
It went overtime as well.
And that's the thing. They always have all these awards where it's like, honestly, if you want to broadcast it to the like everyone else, you probably just want the main stuff. Like no one's gonna care about the best short documentary or short film, or like even as harsh as that may be, but like you can still get the Oscar live stream like on the internet if you really cared about that stuff. And even then, like I would feel the Oscars would be more entertaining if they had a camera facing the audience, to see all these celebrities kind of sitting down there, and when there's like a break, people talking to other people or doing crazy stuff. Like one of the funniest things I saw was a photo someone had of Taika Waititi when he was putting down his Oscars, just underneath the seat. It's kind of this funny thing where he's like, instead of hugging it, he's like, I'm just gonna put it on the seat. Like I'm not gonna hold it. Like I found that's more entertaining than just like, oh, this fake, stuff that's on stage.
Yeah, definitely. And like, look, you have like, okay, like thing. What is it, Natalie Portman? She like wore a dress that featured, like I think like all these directors that she felt like got snubbed from. I don't know if it was like all Oscars or this year's Oscars. I think it must be this year's Oscars, right? Like people who didn't get put on, the in the movies and like categories and getting nominated. But it's kind of hypocritical because I think even her own production company only has one female director, which is herself, right? So even within her, like this is what I'm saying. It's like you have all these people who just talk about like, oh, we love the environment and we need to take care of the environment, but they're kind of flying around in jets and helicopters, wasting all this fuel just to go and tell the average person how they should live their. Yeah, that you're the problem, exactly. And yeah, again, this is exactly what Ricky Gervais was talking about during his speech. Like all these things are just kind of superficial and to get attention.
And even then, it's like I would rather them talk about the process of film, because like me, I really love film. I like the process. I like understanding how people think and their motivations when they film stuff or whatever it may be. I love that stuff, and I feel like that's kind of lost. That's why, like, for example, when I went to the US for the first time 2014, I was very disappointed in Hollywood, because I thought like, oh yeah, they'd have like a whole section about like Hollywood history, how films were made, these like, for me, like I find it really interesting. Like I'm a person who really loves director commentaries, stuff like that, and they just don't really have anything like that, where it's like, oh yeah, this is how it's made. And I feel like it's just like no one really cares about the art form of actual film itself. There's only probably a handful, like Tarantino was at this award show for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and he very much seems like a person who's passionate about film. There's still a handful of them there, but they never really put them there, because I do know Tarantino owns a theater, and he puts random films he suggests in that theater, and I feel like there needs to be more people in Hollywood like that, rather than people just being like, well, I'm in this situation, so I'm just going to talk about politics, rather than the actual art of filming itself. And I think that's where, like, for me, that's where I get mostly disappointed from.
Yeah, I guess, you kind of mentioned it pretty well. Like, maybe they should have, like, some kind of, like, spotlights for, like, the films, you have all these kind of, quote-unquote, great films that get nominated to, actually be important enough to come up and raise people's attention for something, like potentially maybe do some behind the scenes stuff that's specifically for the Oscars. Now obviously, like that's going to cost money, right? And time in order to do so. But it would be pretty interesting to just do some behind the scenes stuff, like especially something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like a lot of the very beginning of that film is like talking about what's happening behind the film. Behind the scenes when you make a movie. Like like it would be interesting to see, but at the same time, a lot of people don't want to give away the magic and how things are. But yeah, I guess we can go through, some of the some of the potential, awards that have come out. So I get one of them. We can go through like the winners and the, nominees and see whether we agree or not. Now, I haven't seen everything, but for example, one of them, best adapted screenplay. Irishman, Little Woman, Joker, Two Popes, and Jojo Rabbit. Jojo Rabbit won. I didn't watch it, so I don't know.
Didn't watch it either.
Yeah, I look, and this is my ignorance, but I don't actually know what it means by adapted screenplay.
Like, I think that means is like if there's like a book, for example, and someone kind of adapted into a thing, so it's already kind of someone's already like, if there's a play about it or it's based off something, someone just made it into a thing, so it's not an original idea.
But that's what I was saying. Like, is The Irishman based on something? The Joker movie is a character. It's not based on a comic.
And I think that's why that category is very loose. In the sense of how it plays its rules, where it's like it has to be like original characters, original scenario type of thing, rather than because if the joke is there, which it is, it's like the character is technically a DC property, so adapted, type of thing.
You see, this is what I feel like when you have a lot of these, when they put the categories out there, in regards to, trying to be hip. It's like, oh, we'll put the Joker in there. People like the Joker. We'll give it 7 nominations.
It had the most nominations out of everyone this year, and I only won, I think, 2. Which reminds me.
Is that normal?
Not really.
No.
For example, most times when something gets nominated, quite a lot of times it does win quite a few awards. It did win 2 awards, which I think is probably was very telling, and I think thank God it won. Obviously, best score. I think it had one of the best scores. I think forgot who exactly did it. But she had, I forgot, it's like a European name, but amazing score, very kind of scary as well.
Oh man, that's a really difficult
name. Yeah, that's why I remember the name.
I'm calling it Hilda.
Yeah. Either way, amazing score where it really did really well, like what Hans Zimmer did for The Dark Knight, where it's kind of like you feel unhinged, you feel a bit off, but it's you want to hear more of it. And obviously, best actor obviously goes to Joaquin Phoenix for the Joker. The real question is, did you is that really a surprise? Is that really? Because the people here is Jonathan Pryce for The Two Popes, Adam Driver for Marriage Story, which is a good performance, Antonio Banderas for Pain and Glory, never heard of it, and Leonardo DiCaprio for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And since he already has an Oscar now, finally he's they're not going to give another one.
They're not going to give him another one ever. Look, a surprise. Look, the thing is, I haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood yet. Marriage Story either. Adam Driver, I don't know. People say he's an amazing actor. I don't see it. Maybe if I watch Marriage Story, maybe I'll get it finally. But out of everybody there, and I haven't seen Pain and Glory. Although I am glad to see Antonio Banderas. I haven't seen a film with him in a while. I think maybe Zorro might have been the last one I saw, but maybe Spy Kids. Whichever. Wait, is it Spy Kids? Which one? There's one of them that he's in.
He's in both.
Yeah, but I forget which ones came out after which.
I think Spy Kids came out later.
It came out later, so yeah, maybe it was Spy Kids. Maybe Spy Kids 2, not sure. But yeah, look, ultimately, if that's who it is, I'm not too surprised that Joaquin Phoenix won, especially since it's one of those things where he literally has been winning it in every other award show,
And that's a really good telling sign that he'll probably win the Oscar version of it.
Yeah, Golden Globes, he won it. BAFTAs, he won it. The SAG Awards won it. So it's one of those things that, like, yeah, if the Oscars don't give it to him, that's like a real big snub. Especially given that he's been nominated 4 separate times to win an Oscar, and this is the first time he's won. So obviously, like, it makes sense.
But
I can't say whether this has been his best performance, but it is definitely, I'm not surprised that he's won.
and it's
Because
what
it was
also
an
I think it's like,
excellent.
yeah, it's like a Leonardo DiCaprio effect where it's like, yeah, about time type of thing.
Mhm.
One thing I am surprised about is best supporting actor. Brad Pitt won, and I don't think he's ever won before until now. Because
Mhm.
yeah, he won Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which, yeah, well deserved. And we basically had Anthony Hopkins for The Two Popes, Joe Pesci for The Irishman, Al Pacino also for The Irishman, and Tom Hanks. Um,
They really wanted. I don't think Irishman won anything,
Irishman
correct?
won nothing. And I feel like, yeah, Martin Scorsese, really great director, really great, storyteller, and he is the master, one of the masters of cinema, and he didn't get anything, which is unfortunate. But like, for example, like Al Pacino has also never won an Oscar as well,
Mhm.
and he also does a really good job in The Irishman. But yeah, I was surprised with Brad Pitt, but I guess he is the mainstream choice, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. There's what is it, recognizability, and also like the way that the Oscars kind of function is really like weird as well. Like, you pick like who's your first pick, but then it's like if that person doesn't win, and then like if the majority picks, like if everybody picks, let's say hypothetically Joker as their number 4 pick, but it gets the most picks for number 4, it like wins, even though most people rated it number 4, if that makes sense. It's a really weird voting system, and I think a lot of people think it's bad. And it also leads to a lot of like kind of quote unquote corruption within the voting system. But hey, you know what? Not my problem. Not a lot of people kind of really take Oscars and their award that they give out super seriously. But yeah, like, there are obviously some really kind of interesting kind of winners from it as well. Like, Parasite obviously like kind of won a bunch of awards.
Yes,
It
including the
won.
obviously the main award, for best picture.
Yeah.
Like, obviously we're gonna do our top 10, so I won't do much of an analysis, but it's a good solid film basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah,
right.
best picture. It won best original screenplay, and it also won best foreign language film. Now, here's something. So online, there was a little bit of a controversy where people were saying like, "Oh, it shouldn't have won best picture because it's already um, nominated for best foreign language film," which technically is kind of supposed to be considered like the best picture from a foreign language film, if that makes sense. Which I can definitely understand the argument of, right? So what do you think when there's this criticism?
That's
Um,
I don't know. I'm very much on two worlds on this, because it's kind of like, if you have the category, then shouldn't all foreign films be barred for the best picture at that point? Like, it very, yeah, it's a very weird way. And obviously there's been a lot of talk about, yeah, as you mentioned, about the Oscars and how they do voting, so maybe there's one of those things that they would probably need to clarify a little bit more. like
well,
it
yeah,
is
but
weird
that
that it won the two best, best
well,
picture
yeah.
and best foreign picture out there. And the thing is, everyone's like, oh, this is the first foreign one. And then everyone forgets, guys, Spirited Away won Best Picture in 2006, and that's a Japanese animated film from Studio Ghibli. Just putting it out
Mm.
there.
Well, here's the thing, right? Like,
And that also brings into the spotlight as well of like our Best Animated Picture. Should that be also barred from Best Picture,
mhm.
as well? Because
Well,
it's
here's
like
the thing.
it's like it's very like, it's like crossing paths.
Well, you see, the way I see it is, isn't the Oscars supposed to be a celebration of like Hollywood films, and like foreign films is like a category that allows third parties that aren't from American developed films to come in and also participate in it, right? Like, kind of like, how they sometimes do, although this is also something that's also very controversial within award ceremonies as well. Like, you have like music categories, and they'll separate. Well, I forget the big Korean kind of boy band. But there was like a big controversy, I think, for MTV where they didn't put like this particular South Korean band group in their main category because if they had of, it would have won, because the sheer amount of people who would have
It's the
voted
popularity.
it. Well, yeah, because you know, like South Korean kind of boy bands like have like a lot of really passionate fans, from my understanding, and so subsequently, like there was a lot of criticism saying, yeah, like they barred him because if they weren't if they were put in the same category as all these other all like big artists like Billie Eilish and all that kind of stuff, it would just win, like it would sweep. And so I can definitely understand the argument. Like, yeah, it makes sense because it actually does skew the results quite significantly. Um, Especially if, like, I agree. Like, I actually don't know what the American box office for Parasite is. Like, did a lot of Americans watch this movie? Like,
I don't know. I think the people in
you
the
know what
know,
I'm
like
you know what I'm
that's
trying
the
to
thing.
say?
I think the people like in the know, like you and me, that know about this film and like know about this type of stuff would probably go watch it or like hear about it. Because most of the time, because I watch foreign films like a lot of times, anyways. But I feel
Mm,
like the normie person, would not watch this film, or if they did, they would like look up, like it'd be like what happened with Drive in 2011. There was one person that thought it was like going to be like a Fast and Furious film, and it was
mm,
not. So they tried to sue the cinema, being like, this is false advertising. So like, to me, because I didn't even know anything about Parasite, and I thought it was going to be like a horror film, because like, yeah, Koreans are really good with their horror films, surprisingly. Surprise,
mm.
surprise. And no,
Well,
it was not that. It was more of a thriller. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like people might have been confused of what it was, but I think they would have caught on very like, oh, this is a foreign film.
Well, look, I just did the quick number crunch now. Like, the American market made up about 20% of the film's kind of box office gross. So that is pretty significant, especially for a foreign film, right? It was made on an 11 million. Well, it was in Korean. I don't know what that. I don't know what kind of
11 Korean million dollars.
well, no, well, it's 13.5 billion Korean dollars, whatever that is. It's like a cool W, with two lines across it. But like, in US USD, it's 11 million, and then it's made back 176 million. So it definitely did a very good job, in terms of being able to return what it initially invested. And yeah, like 35 million came from America. So I think that's pretty significant. I definitely see. I can definitely see the argument that, like, yeah, like, it shouldn't be in quote unquote like I guess a best film picture, like, but it's like, do we segregate films out from being like Hollywood? Like, is there like you know a Bollywood like movie that's gonna make it? Like, this is what I'm trying to see.
Yeah,
It
but
gets
that's the thing.
very like
For
semantic.
yeah, for what I know, to be nominated, to at least be in the consideration for an Oscar thing, it's got to
Mm,
have like obviously a movie like a theatrical release in the US for at least, I think a few cinemas. Of like,
mm,
there's gonna be a few states it's gonna be in. I think it's gonna be in California and like New York. I think that's one of the
mm.
main things, and it has to have some sort of marketing budget, I think, and it's like, and it
Right.
has to be obviously released in that particular year, and I think that's kind of like the how they release that type of thing. And now, but the thing with the Oscars, to even get nominated for anything, it will take like a producer, or like, for your consideration, it's going to take a lot of budget behind it, and whoever was doing the rights to distribute it into the US, whoever it may be, it could even be the Korean company itself. We're just like, you know
Mhm.
what, yeah, let's chip in and let's put some money into it. And it kind of just blew up, I guess, in kind of social circles, because majority of the times, yeah, Korean films and foreign films don't really hit often. It's like maybe like the most recent one I could possibly think of is like Your Name, and that's like obviously animated,
Mhm.
and that's kind of really it. And it's like, aside from Ghibli films and maybe, yeah, like a few foreign film directors that most people do know of, it really doesn't really hit the critical demographic that it would, get that, the money rolling in, I guess.
Mhm. And just an additional thing, man, like, I love how there's always this kind of criticism of, kind of these kind of comic book films, like, oh, they're all the same, and They don't necessarily deserve to like come in the category. It's very weird that like Avengers Endgame didn't get any kind of nomination. Like, look, I get it. It's it's a Marvel film, but like it didn't even get nominated for like visual effects.
No, it did. It did.
Did it?
It got nominated for visual effects and something else, but it didn't win. That's the thing. It won
Ah,
zero.
okay.
It won completely zero Oscars.
Okay, maybe that was my understanding. So it did get nominated. That's good,
I think it got nominated for
guess.
2 categories, but regardless, it didn't win anything.
Hmm.
And I think that's just
Like,
it's holding face.
I think that just kind of shows that they're kind of a little bit outside of like the zeitgeist of movie goers, right? Like obviously, like yeah, this is like kind of the biased aspect of it. If we just let maybe your average person decide like what that was their best movie, like it's going to be probably the most popular movie that everybody watched, which would have been Endgame, right? Probably. It made like 2 billion.
It
So
made all the
that's,
money in the world.
yeah, but my main criticism is like you talk about like they kind of criticize like all these movies are kind of the same. Oh, we'll nominate Joker and Black Panther because they're slightly different, but they generally they don't mention they don't nominate superhero films. But then you have Little Women, who has 7 film adaptations. One of them one that came out last year, but I think that's more like a modern version, a modern adaptation, rather than it being set in the, I don't know,
1800s probably.
1800s.
But yeah, I know what you mean. I do remember that was your criticism as well for last year.
Yeah,
for,
what was that other film that was,
the Bradley Cooper one,
what
Star
was
is
that
Born.
one? Star is Born.
Because that was remade like 4 times, and yeah, they're just like, oh yeah, music, movies.
Yeah, it's just like they just have these hard-ons for like all these kind of adaptations for like books, but then it's like, oh,
But it's
well,
like adaptation for comic books. Yeah,
no, we kind of
it's a comic book.
kind of that. Yeah, I just think it's ridiculous. But yeah, it's
Either way, the Oscars are the Oscars, and this is since it is the lowest ratings. Maybe they'll do something different, or who knows? Maybe they'll just keep it going until everyone just
not.
Who cares? At that point.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's always very interesting for me to see what they do with the awards and who they give it out to. I hope that given that like the Joker is probably the most kind of like in terms of like it's like an outsider film, right?
It literally was the dark horse.
Yeah, like in that respect, like I almost feel like there was like a social pressure to kind of put that film in because it kind of seems like an odd one out in a lot of cases compared to like some of these other films. Like with the Tarantino kind of film, like yeah, like he makes his like a film that you would expect to win awards, right? Ironically, only won like 1 or 2, right?
I think it won like about there, but still like it it probably isn't his best work, and yeah, we'll talk about that soon. But yeah, it's you can definitely tell that Joker was a different type of film, and I feel like it's very curious because like the reviews, as we mentioned on Rotten Tomatoes, it's pretty much nearly on that bordering of negative. But the
Really?
Academy was just basically like. Most critics don't like it, which the Academy is most of the time critics and a few other people who work in the industry. So I feel like Joker was the very divisive movie of I guess 2019.
But and that's what's weird. You think like based on the critics, like they would make it so that the film doesn't end up becoming a nominee, but like clearly, I feel like there was probably at least some kind of social pressure to kind of put it in. Once again, we did it, boys. We got Joker to win that Oscar. It was all of us.
But on top of that, like the Academy also includes people like actual directors, writers, cinematographers, like everyone in the industry involved. I don't know how they weigh in like how much person's worth is, like, or is it the exact same type of like a director gets more than like a producer or something. But regardless, I think there's a lot of people in Hollywood that aren't critics that do like the film. It's just that critics just and even then, like, critics aren't the fans of, I guess, the Academy at some points. Like the people who are in the Academy are the people who are in the production of making films, and they thought that yes, the Joker is actually a good film, or like has good aspects in the film that deserves to be nominated, whilst people in the reviewing industry are just like, yeah, like they're outside, like they're in it, but they're not really in it. Like they're not making the film. So like,
Yeah.
they're probably just like, yeah, whatever. We'll just vote in like Joker.
Look, in the end, what happened is the people won, and the people is all that matters, such as us. And I think that's probably a good segue for us to talk about what we thought were the best and worst films of this year. Did you want to start with the worst films and just kind of talk about like what we consider to be pretty bad films?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna rattle a few down.
Yeah.
Doom Annihilation. That was a terrible, terrible Doom film that even like Bethesda were just
Doom
like,
and I-
yeah,
Oh yeah, that was pretty bad.
yeah, and then
I
even
know-
Bethesda
okay,
was
does
like,
that
hey, like we're not involved with this film at all. Like,
Fuck, maybe I need to edit my list because yeah, Doom was pretty bad. I didn't originally want to watch it, but I was at a friend's place and it was on Netflix and like, all right, let's just watch this, and yeah, it was pretty bad. But yeah, like okay, well, okay, I guess we can make this like really short because I've only got like five because these were the only five that I
despised.
saw, right? Number five for me was Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker.
Ooh, hot take.
Yeah, it's bad, but ironically, not the worst film that I watched last year. So that says something, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. It's like it's a bad film, but it's not the worst film. So
It wins. It wins points for that.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like, and I think that's we've kind of ragged on kind of the modern, kind of reboot trilogy or whatever you really want to call it. And yeah, there's a lot of things that are bad about it, but like, if you kind of want to look at it from like a quote unquote objective standpoint, yeah, it does have like a plot and it does have characters and they do things and competently, it's at least like a 5. But that's the problem. A 5 for a Star Wars film is really bad, and that's where it comes. That's where I can separate my like kind of fanboy Star Wars bias from. What about you? What would you to be?
Well, I don't really hate things as much, but I put Dumbo, the live action adaptation of it. I think purely because it just didn't do anything. It's just the same animated thing, and I think the reason why I put it there is just because our favorite Tim Burton, he's just doing very mediocre work, and I wish he just did something. Maybe he just doesn't have the passion anymore. But yeah, I was kind of disappointed in what he's doing.
Maybe he needs the money.
Yeah,
that seems to make the most sense. Yeah. So, funnily enough that you mentioned Dumbo, because I'm putting as my number 4 another Disney film, Aladdin. Now, we talked about this film literally like 2 seconds ago, and yeah, funnily enough, despite being like a competent film, I think it's worse just because it is literally an uninspired remake of a vastly superior animated movie that does a lot more because it's like animated and can kind of do cool things. The only redeeming factor of it was like Genie, right?
Pretty much.
Will Smith's Genie, but everything else, like even the additional things they put in that are supposed to maybe like set up for the next movie, like, oh, what happened to Jasmine's mom, and her mom's from like this other country, and that was in war or something with Agrabah, and that's probably going to make a point. But it's like, who cares? We only care about like Aladdin and the surrounding characters, and it's like, it wasn't that good.
Yeah. I could definitely see that. The funny thing is, let's make this a trifecta because my one is also a Disney film, Lion King.
You know what? Funnily enough, I'll mention it now. So Lion King was in my special mention. I hadn't seen it, but I've heard nothing but awful things about it.
Yes, it's basically a 1-for-1 remake. I don't like the animation quality of it. Like I wish they just had, because I think there was a comparison of like if they made it have cartoony eyes, it wouldn't. It looks too realistic and it doesn't really work. But if they made it a little bit more like cartoony or stylistic in such a way,
Sonic,
like
Sonic,
like
right?
Sonic, it would have been a lot cooler. And it's funny how it's live action, but it's still animated. But it's just like I just don't care. Like it's just whatever of a film. So that's another bad film.
Do you think it's like a similar problem like that they had with Dumbo and Aladdin? Like they're just like 1-for-1 remakes and they don't do anything original. right?
Yeah, and it's
I
like
remember seeing
yeah, if
there
it's
was like,
if it's in person or like live action, you're gonna play with the format to be like, what can you do
well, yeah,
differently?
and
You know?
there was like a side by side comparison. Like I think there was like a song from like sorry, not Aladdin, but probably for Aladdin as well, for Lion King. There was like a song side by side, but like in the song for the the animated movie, uh, sorry, the cartoon animated movie. I've got to be more specific, right? The cartoon animated movie. Like they do a lot more with it, like oh, like Simba's like dancing around and he's like flipping around and shit. Whereas like in the actual 3D animated movie, it's just them walking, and it's like, oh, okay, well that's not as interesting, right? It's like, so what's the point of the format stage?
Yeah,
Um,
that is true.
well, my number three after that is X-Men Dark Phoenix.
That is
Um,
basically my one upcoming as well. Like, yeah,
oh well, there you go. Well, we can talk about it at the same time. Look at us! Look at us having similar tastes for bad films. Yeah, man. I think the problem with X-Men Dark Phoenix is the fact that it was so. It was like so much of nothing.
yeah. I felt like
It was
nothing
so
really
boring.
like at all. Like this movie is like it was pretty short as well. It was like an hour like
Oh
45,
yeah,
and
and
like and
and
basically
what?
nothing happened. Is like she had her powers. She finds out her origins of like her dad and everything, and then everything just kind of goes off the rails. There's like maybe two set pieces. It kind of just
Yeah,
dissipates, and it feels like they try to set up something or they had something in place, especially with like I forgot the alien race or whatever it is that
you
were
know,
there, but then they just kind of completely drop it, and it just who cares at that point, you know?
well, the alien. From my understanding, the adaptation with the alien race is actually one for one with the comics in a way, because there is the Phoenix Force is something that's related to the aliens or whatever. But it's one of those things that, like, when you make an adaptation of like Batman, right? You don't pick out like that one time where Batman fought, like, I don't know, a version of himself, but he's like in all pink or all blue, and
The
he's
variant
like
costumes.
fighting. Yeah, like, all these like kind of weird things. Like, you don't pick those stories. You pick out like the good, or like you might pick that story, but you might want to just pick like a component of it. It's like, oh, they introduce this character in this comic for the first time, and we're gonna use him going forward. Like, they don't even do that in a way to kind of, and it's like the second time they botched the Dark Phoenix storyline for X-Men. And that's the thing, like, I actually really like, I think Sophie Turner, that's the actress's name. She's really great in Game of Thrones, and I really liked her as Jean Grey, but unfortunately they dropped the ball with her again. um and yeah, like, what is they killed off Jennifer Lawrence, like, I don't know, like,
To be fair,
literally,
she
like,
didn't want to be there. She looked very
I don't think,
disinterested.
yeah,
So
I
she's
don't
just
think
like, please kill me.
I don't think anybody wanted her there. They didn't. Oh, she was so bad in the film. She was bad in Apocalypse as well, right?
Yeah, I think
And
that's
it's like her
where it
makeup,
started to be
her
like, yeah, I don't want to be here.
her makeup got worse as the series went on. Like, you could just tell that, like, man, she just got too famous and therefore didn't want to wear the makeup anymore. And yeah, again, she's like the worst part of, like, the film,
The
and then they kill
newish,
her off.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's kind of good. I mean, look, her role in Days of Future's Past is good. I like that, but it's like she's not a front and center character in that. She's just like a piece of the puzzle in that particular movie.
Mm.
But yeah, I think, like, Dark Phoenix, like, the problem with that film is that, again, it was boring, and that's kind of pathetic for an X-Men film.
Especially
But
for
that's the
like the
thing.
last one and try to set up so much, especially for also such a classic storyline. It's just kind of tragic.
Exactly, with classic characters, like, I recently I started reading the X-Men comics, right? And so I'm kind of like, kind of keeping up with some of them, like mainly X-Men and X-Force. Like, there's those ones are the particular ones that are pretty good. And once again, like, Marvel has a treasure trove with um, what characters that they can explore in these movies. And so I hope that, going forward, Kevin Feige is able to adapt X-Men in a good way, and in a way that makes them a little bit more timeless than what we've had to deal with through Fox, which is usually like a DC approach, whereas, like, some movies are good, some movies are, you know. or you know, or like, you know, certain characters are going to be iconic. Like, there's no way that Hugh Jackman isn't going to be considered like, you know,
The definitive
Wolverine.
Wolverine.
Yeah, even though he's nothing like character almost, right? Like, he's like 6 foot tall and like, I don't know, like, you know, even the one in the comics, like, really kind of like unlikable. He's kind of likable in the
Yeah,
in
because Hugh
the
Jackman
movie.
is a very likable person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
But
yeah,
yeah,
I guess
like move on to your like number two, I guess.
number two would have to be Captain Marvel.
Yep, that's
It's
also my number two, guys.
it's very boring.
Yeah,
Um,
the film is like more lower than average, and it's probably the most forgettable MCU film. And there's no cool
yeah,
set pieces. The special effects are bad.
this
Acting's pretty bad. And the story's bad. The only thing good is like Samuel Jackson, and that's about it.
Samuel L. Jackson's pretty good in it. That's true. It does set up like some interesting stuff with like the scrolls and stuff, but that's not enough to save the film. The Captain Marvel character doesn't really like struggle. She kind of, well, I'll just burst this chip that's controlling me and get even more powerful. Yeah, like, it's just like plot contrivances are really bad, and they more or less had this film. Like, I feel like this film only did really well because it has the Marvel name, and people thought, "Oh, I need to go watch this film in order to understand what's going on in Avengers Endgame."
Yeah, because
But
obviously
ultimately,
at the end of Infinity War, they had the Captain Marvel symbol, so they're just like, okay, then set up, you know.
yeah, and yeah, and ultimately, that's where it is. Look, I ranted more about how bad like Dark Phoenix was, but ultimately, like, yeah, Captain Marvel was a worse film, and more forgettable.
Yeah, I'm
So
never gonna
yeah,
watch that again. That's for sure.
okay. So I'll say what my number one worst here is. I don't think it'll be the same as yours, but my
I don't think so either, to be honest with you,
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
mine's a kind of a dark horse.
Oh, as in like I haven't seen it. Is that the reason
I don't
why?
think not many people have seen it, but I forced myself to watch it. I'm like, why the hell did I do it?
Why did I watch it? Oh, okay. So my worst film of last year was Godzilla King of Monsters.
Ooh,
Uh, yeah, like, other than the monster fights, which were really good in it, the rest of the film is horrible. And I said it before in our review of the movie that, you know, the problem with the first Godzilla film was that they didn't have enough Godzilla in it, and, you know, they only have it at the end, and that's the only part that anybody gives a shit about.
mm.
Uh, and a lot of this film, there's like maybe 50% more. No, actually, no, that's actually um, doing a disservice. There's a lot more monsters in it in this film, in the second film, uh, but ultimately there's a big focus on the human side of it, and no one gives a shit. And the story is really bad and very predictable and very poorly written. And then, I
And
don't know,
it
the
just
chick
does
from
all the
Stranger
bad
Things,
things.
and the chick from Stranger Things, like, is plays a really important part and doesn't die at a pretty critical moment where like two monsters are fighting at a stadium. Like, it's just it's this level of unbelief. Like, you know, you're already like, the thing is, when you watch a film and, you know, there's like a suspension of disbelief, right? Like, you know, I like superhero comic. Sorry, well, I like superhero comics. I like superhero movies as well. You're supposed to have a suspension of disbelief when you watch it, because you're like, oh well, no way somebody can jump that high or be in a metal suit, because, you know, obviously gravity would crush you inside the suit or whatever it may be, right? Like, you have to have a sense of disbelief that the movie is able to kind of allow for, because the movie does a good job internally at explaining why certain things happen the way they are. For a lot of Godzilla, the science of it, the kind of plot contrivances, the general flow, acting, all horrible. Like I said, the only redeeming features is the monster fights, and maybe when the humans are running away from the monsters.
Just away
But
from her.
yeah, but like, you can probably find those clips on YouTube. Just do that, and that's far more enjoyable than watching these films, the entire film. At least, like, you know, Captain Marvel doesn't have any personality, but like, there's like hundreds of people like in Godzilla that have like zero personality, so it's not really worth watching. Yeah,
Okay, that's your number one. My
yeah.
one is Hellboy. the
Oh,
2019
okay, that's a
remake.
pretty good one. That was on my special mention.
Yes.
That I hadn't watched it, but I heard really bad things about it.
Yes. So first of all, I'm a big fan of the Guillermo del Toro, Ron Perlman Hellboys. I think Hellboy 2: The Golden Army is like still in the top 10 best comic book films of all time. I feel like that film is just so solid. I do remember I watched that film, and as soon as I finished watching it, I rewatched it again, like straight after. That's how much I have an attachment to Hellboy. Read all the comics, big fan of the art and everything like that. And this film is like basically they got rid of my Hellboy 3 for this film, and it just hurts me to the core. Not only because we'll never see the Ron Perlman version, but this is just they basically just like, okay, we'll make it R-rated, and we'll just put a bunch of swear words in there and a lot of gore for no real reason. Really incoherent story and plot. You know, they mention something like 50 like mention something, and then 15 minutes later they have one of those like flashbacks, and like they repeat the exact same thing that you learnt because, oh, the character remembered something, like, you know, shit like that, all the way to just like special effects are pretty bad. You know, I'd say David Harbour does a relatively good job as playing Hellboy, but he has a really terrible script. At sometimes I thought he was Ron Perlman just because of his voice, but you know, the makeup looks terrible. Just everything about it, and presentation wise, is just so disgusting almost. And it's just one of those things.
Disgusting. Wow.
Yeah, special effects look bad. Yeah, it's not only just the special effects, but the makeup looks bad. Even like the cinematography and the way things are shot, it's just very ugly and really hard to look at. So
Wow.
good job
Hard
on that.
to look at. Damn.
It's really hard to explain, but when you watch it, I don't
No,
know.
no, 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 no. Don't get it twisted. I totally get it. I'm just like, I'm appreciating. Usually it's me, you know, it kind of meticulously dissecting how bad certain movies are. You're a lot more forgiving than me, but you're really laying into this movie. I like it.
Yeah, yeah. I should be more, you know, be like, oh, this is terrible type of thing. But
Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
Okay.
but
But yeah,
no,
but that's what I mean. Like I've heard I think even you said to me actually that like the beginning of this film, there's like a really cool fight, with like the giant or whatever it is.
yeah. I
But
think
then the
about
rest of the
20,
movie,
30 minutes into the movie, there's like a kind of semi one take fight with the giants, which is kind of cool. But everything else about, like, you know, story structure and plotting, and like there's a lot of Deus Ex Machinas going on in the plot. Like everything just does not work in this film. And yeah, it's one of those things where, like, if I was one of those YouTubers, and I'm pretty sure there's been YouTubers where, like, this is one of those films where you can go scene by scene and like literally like stop it at each scene and deconstruct why this is a terrible plot choice, or this is why this is a terrible thing in the movie. Like, it's one of those where like everything in the film, there's not many redeeming factors, and if it does, it's very slim, you know.
yeah, exactly.
But yeah,
In,
but
in, terms,
mhm.
in terms of other films that had that were in my special mentions for like movies that like I I, I thought was bad. I didn't mention it, but I had Lion King in it as well. Cats.
Yeah, I
I've heard
haven't
nothing
watched
about
Cats, but I'm
horrible
pretty
things.
sure it's bad.
Yeah, I have heard horrible things. The thing is, this movie was marketed pretty well. I don't know how well it did in the box office, but this movie did so bad that they actually sent a second digital like edit of the movie to cinemas, right? Like kind of very similar to like, you know, this is the kind of generation that we're living in terms of movies where you can put patches on movies,
Movies
right?
have
It's not too
DLC now.
yeah, like you don't have to it's not the end, you know. You can do a name update like with the Harley Quinn movie as well, right? um but yeah, that's yeah, so there's Cats, which, you know, again, I think they must have spent like a lot of money making that film.
Yeah,
I
well, they got
feel
Taylor
like,
Swift
right?
to be in the film, so I'm pretty
they
sure that
got
didn't
they got
cost
ta-
that, you know.
well, they had like Taylor Swift, they had Judi Dench in it.
Ian
um
McKellen.
Yeah, like, you know, there's all these big like it was made for allegedly 95 million, which, to be honest, not that much.
Pretty modest.
Like,
But that's the thing.
pretty much.
None of that money went to the special effects budget. That's for sure.
Oh, okay, yeah, I guess James Corden, Jason Derulo. I look, Derulo, I haven't really seen him in mainstream in a long time, but yeah, Idris Elba, Jennifer Hudson, Rebel Wilson. Obviously, look, always great to see Rebel do well, like in her in a niche that she occupies, you know.
Yes.
But yeah, like it had a lot of names, but it just didn't do good. So maybe those names weren't as good as it as I originally think. There's also Terminator Dark Fate was another one.
Mm.
I hadn't seen, but I've heard like pretty meh bad things.
Yeah,
Charlie's
relatively.
Angels. I've seen Charlie's Angels, but it was significantly better than I initially thought it would be. Men in Black International. That's
Ah,
another.
totally forgot about that. That would be totally somewhere in that list. Because
Oh
my
yeah,
God,
have you seen?
what a step down of any charisma in that film at all. Like you don't have Will Smith. Um, but once again, it kind of takes the whole, thing about learning about the Men in Black. Um, basically being the rookie in the ranks, kind of going up. Essentially, the way they plot this is just that the new recruit, totally forgot her name. She's just obsessed with the Men in Black, and she knows everything about them from the get go. And she already knows everything. She passes all the exams quite easily and just moves forward like she's been part of the Men in Black for years, type of thing. And it doesn't have the same kind of thing where like Will Smith's character, he had to learn about the Men in Black.
Yeah, he's like the fish out of water. Right?
Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones was telling me about stuff, but she's like, I know everything, so I'm just gonna tell you exactly how to do these things because I know more than you, and I should be the head of the Men in Black because that's what I say. Basically, that's what that movie was.
I mean, Tessa Thompson, like her and what is it? Thor, right? Back at it again.
She's in Thor. She's in Westworld. I'm basically over her. Stop shoving her in stuff.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Like in Thor, Thor Ragnarok, she had a lot of chemistry with Thor's
Chris
character,
Hemsworth, which
Chris
Chris Hemsworth's
character.
back in this film, and it just doesn't
exactly.
work.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that like it's not just the actors. It's not the actor that necessarily dictates whether a movie is good. It's also whether the script and how they're directed is very important too. So it kind of goes to show that. Yeah, with something like Men in Black, I love the Men in Black series. I even like the movie that kind of came out. Was it Men in Black 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, that movie actually wasn't that bad. Like, it was pretty good. But yeah, like it wasn't amazing. But again, it's hard to capture that particular like fire again when it comes to a movie franchise series. But sometimes you remake something and it's good. Sometimes it isn't. But I guess that's probably a good lead into our top movies of 20.
Well, I want to raise one thing. I want to raise a segment of movies that you didn't get, like something that, like, for example, like critics liked it and you don't know why people liked it, or like even like me, where I'm just like, you like this film but I didn't like this film. Like for me, I got two films. One is Midsummer, that horror film made from the director of Hereditary. I thought it was shot. I thought it was shot really well. Cinematography is my thing. It looks really good, but I just didn't get the hype for it. As well as Hustlers. I don't understand how.
That's the J-Lo film.
That's the one. No. Hustlers is the Jennifer Lopez one and everything like that. I just don't get the. I just didn't get the appeal of why. Yeah, the J-Lo film, and I just don't get the appeal of like why it was so highly praised. It's just like a very like like I don't get it. But that's why I didn't get films.
Yeah, like I've heard about Midsummer. It looks really like kind of edgy, and then like after now that you told me it's made by the same person who made whatchamacallit? Hereditary. Totally get it. That's the reason why. Same people, same kind of I guess incestual kind of people, kind of like within the Hollywood industry, kind of voting for their own people. That's it. It's just the same people jacking themselves off. I don't think Hereditary was like okay, but then like to be honest, I think the beginning is better, or maybe it was the middle. I don't know.
I think the first 20 minutes is pretty solid, and then like
basically when the chick gets her head hit off, like that's when like shit kind of starts getting pretty good. But then it's like towards the end, it's like almost becomes like an eldritch horror plot, right? Like that's but it's like very in your face. And yeah, Midsummer, I know about the film and I know the synopsis, and it just kind of seems like, I think the interesting thing that the film does is like it looks, for a horror thriller film, it's very bright and it's very like colorful, right?
Yeah, it's like horror in the day type of thing.
Yeah, which I think is kind of rare to do and execute properly. But I mean, maybe that's why people really liked it. I guess for me, like, I guess Captain Marvel. I don't have anything in particular that I can kind of get why people like these films.
Yeah.
for the most part. But like with Captain Marvel in particular, I was, man, this movie's so bad. How is it getting such high reviews? And how did it make $1 billion?
That will
Like at
forever
least,
be Disney's mystery.
it's a Disney Disney magic, right?
Mhm.
But yeah,
But
I guess we can move
yeah.
on to. Is there any other
No.
to
That's pretty
mention?
much it. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think let's move on to our top 10 best films of 2019. Finally, I would say. So what I'll do is I'll kick off my number 10, and we by the way we both don't have no idea
No
whose
idea.
list is, so this could be a very big surprise for anything.
Hmm.
So let's go. I think my top 10, number 10 is Knives Out. I watched this
Okay.
literally yesterday because this is probably the only film in 2019 where I haven't watched, and I'm like, this could possibly maybe on my list. And it's on my list as a top 10. I feel like it's a pretty good, solid mystery thriller. You know, you have Daniel Craig being kind of like the sleuth detective trying to figure out basically a whodunit story of, you know, basically a granddad supposedly committing suicide. And you know, you have this I guess family with very colorful characters who have all they explain their backstories pretty damn well, and gives it a good characterization. And it's basically just a good whodunit story that you don't really see that often these days. So I feel like, and you know, essentially the whole point of a really good thriller film is that you at least want to be able to kind of maybe solve it as you're watching the film, or it's not too unplausible for the film. And I felt like it did a relatively good-ish way to do that. And I feel like, yeah, I think Knives Out is a pretty good start for my top 10.
Yeah. So one kind of like side note that I'd like to mention, I haven't seen like a few movies that I think would probably knock this film that I'm going to mention out immediately, but like I haven't seen like Uncut Gems, and I haven't seen what is it, 1917, and I haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think these films could easily like make it into my top 10 list, but unfortunately I haven't gotten around to go and watch them. So unfortunately that's the reason why my list might be a little bit more maybe not to my taste, because even I didn't necessarily want to put this one on my top 10 list, but
But
you
it's
know,
there.
yeah, it's there because like some of the other ones I'm like, not so much. So, It Chapter 2. Now, It Chapter
Didn't you
2,
say this was disappointing?
it was disappointing, but I don't think it was like a bad film, if that made sense. I think like it did like the adaptation of like the It book and like the It kind of like the franchise that it represents in a good way, and I like the characters. It's just like when you compare it to something like um, when you compare it to something like It Chapter One, It Chapter One does a very like much better job at it. So yeah, not really much else to say for that one, because my 10th spot is like my flex spot. You know, it's just there because there's nothing else that can really fit into it. But I'll go with my number 9 because it's kind of important. But my number 9 was actually Knives Out,
There we go.
which you just mentioned. So yeah, Knives Out. I really was surprised by like how much I like this film, because originally, because I was like, oh well, this is the same guy who did what is
It
this?
ruined Star Wars forever.
Who ruined Star Wars single handedly. But you know, he actually made a film. Like he's actually made another film that I think I
Like,
like.
I think Loop is alright.
Lupa? Yeah, Lupa I actually really enjoyed. But yeah, Knives Out, it's like a original take on a murder mystery. Um, Again, like, you know, the murder kind of almost plays second fiddle to what's happening with everything else in the movie itself. A lot of the characters are very like zany and wild, yeah, and very unique. And it's like, again, a modern twist on like a murder mystery movie, especially if you compare it to something like Murder on the Orient Express, right? That's like another film that came out I think this year, and people
I
kind
think
of
it came out.
didn't
I think it
respond
came
to
out. It came out last year, but still, it
last year.
just
Oh, sorry, my bad. But
but
yeah,
still
like, you know,
very
that's like a
whatever.
film like, yeah, very whatever, and people didn't like it. Whereas like this is kind of putting a fresh twist on it, and from my understanding, it is getting like a sequel of sorts, which is going to be centered around like the detective character, um, and so that seems like a pretty interesting way to go about doing like kind of its own like what is it like Miss Marple and all those other kind of like detective shows, right? It's kind of its own new entity that's coming out. So what's your number 9?
Yes. My number 9 is Dragged Across Concrete. What is
Ooh,
this
okay.
film?
Yeah,
Uh,
what is this film?
yes, exactly. It has two great actors, Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn, in it. And this
Okay.
is from this guy who directed the film and wrote the film is S. Craig Ziegler, and he's basically becoming my new best, I guess. What do you call it? Like a director that's kind of coming up the ranks. So he's done two films that I think a lot of people do know these days, and he has a shooting style that is very 70s like. So he did Brawl in Cell Block 99, and he also did Bone Tomahawk.
Okay.
These films are very 70s. They're basically like what Tarantino would kind of make.
Hmm.
And yeah, he's slowly becoming the ranks of like people are starting to really see him as a really great writer and director. And this film is basically about two cops who I guess don't really fit into the mold of cops anymore. They kind of get suspended before they could even get their their retirement money. So what they kind of do is they basically kind of track down criminals who've basically stolen some money,
Hmm.
and it basically they track them down and basically try to take the money from themselves. Um,
Hmm.
and that's kind of the main premise. Obviously, there's a lot more cool character moments. I think Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn really work really well together. And yeah, I think that the main thing why I like this movie is just because it just has that 70s grit that you don't see in films anymore. It has that kind of Dirty Harry esque type feel to it. Sometimes the bad guys don't always win, or like the bad guys do win sometimes, or like essentially these two characters that you do follow aren't necessarily good, but you enjoy their kind of interactions with each other. And yeah, I just really enjoyed there's a few shootouts. It's really great. And I feel like don't miss out on all these films like Dragged Across Concrete and Brawl in Cell Block 99. Two solid, great films that I think people just need to see more of. So that is my number one choice of 2019.
Yeah, nice. Well, I guess I'll go with number 8. We kind of went out of order, but yeah, I'll go with my number 8. So my number 8 is Doctor Sleep. I really like this film. It kind of didn't do so well in like the box office, which I think is purely because of how it was marketed. If it had just been called, what is it, Shining 2, Doctor Sleep, it would have done significantly better. Yeah, I think from a box office perspective, but yeah, I think the film does a good job at building on the original, uh, film without having to necessarily like you don't necessarily need to watch The Shining in order to understand Doctor Sleep, but it kind of expands the world in which Stephen King, uh, kind of introduces through his books. Ian McGregor does an excellent job at playing Danny, and they do a really good job at kind of going back and like there's like some CG stuff where they kind of re reshoot or go back to that area in the past in the original Shining book, and kind of collect it and diversify it within the new concept of all these kind of like basically like soul sucking vampires. As and then also kind of having like the new god, I forget the actress's name, but Abra, she's like the little girl in it who also has like the Shining, which is kind of just like a catch-all term for like these kind of psychic abilities that everybody kind of uniquely have. So yeah, I think a lot of people didn't go and watch this film, but it's a really really good one. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what's my number.
Gotcha. Well, then my number 8 is Uncut Gems. This obviously got snubbed at the Oscars, 100%. I feel like Adam Sandler did a really great performance. Probably wouldn't beat Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker, but he did a really solid performance. Probably the best he's ever done. Even beating his Punch Drunk Love performance, which is also him in a serious role. So Uncut Gems, out of all the films that I've kind of picked for basically the top 5, for example, this one
Mm-hmm.
I've watched twice. because one of my friends really wanted to
Okay.
watch it, so I'm like, okay, I'll rewatch it. Um, and I feel like I got more out of it when watching it the second time around. I think just the way it's designed, because not only do you get a amazing performance with Adam Sandler, because essentially he's kind of like a crazy guy. He doesn't know when to call it quits. He's a guy who owes a lot of money to like the mob, but instead of like owing it back, he just uses that money to gamble, and he just makes really really bad decisions. So it's one of those
Mhm.
films where it's like you just keep on seeing these really bad decisions happen over and over again. But I think the genius I think behind this film is not only just in the performance and the way it shows things, but I think on top of that, one of the main reasons why I kind of noticed it when I was watching it the second time is that the audio design is actually quite well done in this movie. And I think the best way to explain it is, when you mostly when you watch a film, you have one character talking, and then you have another character talking, and you have another character talking, type of thing. So it's kind of like it's kind of segmented in characters talking. But
Mhm.
since the character and I guess the situation is so like furious and so kind of like crazy, and everything's going on at the same time, the audio design reflects back on that. So it has bits where like Adam Sandler's talking to one character, and then like there'll be another character talking on top of Adam Sandler's like talking points, and it kind of does that for a lot of the different scenes where it's so hectic, where like Adam Sandler's talking to one person, other person's talking to another person. Some people ignore whatever the person said, and they're talking to one person directly. So it kind of keeps this up in this momentum, and it kind of makes you as a viewer feel kind of uncomfortable, and you feel like like you're so agitated because everyone's just talking over each other. And it's like little minor things that you wouldn't notice, especially the first time around, which I didn't. But when I watched it the second time, I realized that yeah, the audio design is like everyone's talking on top of each other, and the way it works, it just makes it just like you're kind of in the mind of Adam Sandler's character, where it's just like you're focusing on particular things rather than the main thing that you should be focusing on. So that's why I think Uncut Gems is also basically my number 8 film of 2019.
Okay. Yep, my number 7 film will be or is John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum. Um, I only recently got into the John Wick films this year, and while number 1 is probably the best one so far, and like it kind of dipped with number 2 in terms of like what they're trying to do with the plot. Number 3 kind of like cranks it up to high gear again. There's probably like one particular like fight that's kind of like boring, but even when I say it's boring, it's still really entertaining to watch. Keanu does an excellent job at like obviously his character's like pretty one dimensional, but that like with all the training that he got for John Wick, like all the scenes are him doing all the like reloading, all the guns, grabbing and executions. Like it's him practicing these certain moves that he's kind of done, and you kind of see that in the big screen. While at the same time kind of expanding more about like what is the Continental, what is their role here, and what's happening in the future of all things in this world. Like I'm pretty sure there's a chapter 4 in the making, and I'm excited to see more. So
Mm.
yeah, that's my number 7.
Yeah, number 7. My number 7 is Alita Battle Angel. Um, yeah, so I like the animus, and this is based off an OVA of Alita Battle Angel. And it's basically more or less a one-on-one adaptation. There's a few things that have changed, obviously. Um, but basically, I'm just shocked on how well this is translated into film. Um, first of all, like obviously James Cameron wanted to make this for a very long time, for like over 10 years, and even Steven Spielberg was like attached to it at one point, and moved to Robert Rodriguez. But he still has a good sense, especially with James Cameron's script. And I guess he produced the film as well, so those two kind of worked really well together. Because not only does it show that Robert Rodriguez can make more than just like kind of fluff pulp type of films, because he did like Spy Kids, Desperado, Planet Terror. Like he makes very schlocky films, and it just shows that he can actually do a big blockbuster if he actually really wanted to, and kind of commit to it. So not only really great with that, but on top of that, but it's first time that you really see a really solid, really great anime adaptation. You know, that's done really well. In its quality and its characters and things like that. And you know, on top of all this as well, is that you know, the special effects is really well done. But yeah, like the special effects are really well done, especially Alita. You know, at first she has big eyes, and then you're questioning why she has big eyes, and but you know, it works well with the story. And on top of that, the special effects look great, and it doesn't really give you too much of, like, for me at least, it didn't give me too much alienation, and I totally believed her as a character. You know, I love the actual character, and the way Rose Salazar bring the character to life in motion capture, and I really enjoyed the film. So you know, basically number 7 is Alita Battle Angel, and let's hope Disney gives it a sequel.
Yeah, does Disney make it?
Fox did it, but you know, Disney owns Fox
Okay.
now, so basically
Yeah,
let's hope
true.
that they at least give it another chance.
Oh, well, we'll have to see. There's a lot of content for it. So yeah, my number 6 is Shazam. Um, yeah, like I'm not really too sure what to really say about it other than the fact that it's just a really enjoyable film that kind of has that. I don't know what to really describe it as. Like maybe it's like a '90s vibe, or you know, it's like very wholesome. It's like almost wholesome in terms of like you know the plot and what's happening in it. Like you know, but then it's also very like hyper realistic with the story regarding like you know a kid earning his powers and then learning how to do it. But then it's also very modern because like you know they're obviously like he's filming it with his best friend and how to do it. You know, like my one problem with it would be like the villain in it, but like even that's not like a deal breaker for it because a lot of this film is very enjoyable with all the characters in it. Even they expand more about like Billy Batson's like kind of like you know paternal mother and stuff like that. Oh, sorry, maternal mother. And yeah, like a lot of it's really cool, and I love to see the adaptation of it, and I hopefully get that sequel with The Rock playing as Black Adam.
Yep, I do hope that will come out soon. So my number 6 is John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh, right.
I think the John Wick films are basically the best thing that you can possibly get for action in modern day cinema these days. Aside like main Hollywood ones, I would say. And yeah, like Keanu obviously steals the show. This is kind of his bring back to form. All the John Wick films, but yeah, I just really enjoy just the you know, not only is John Wick a really cool film in the way it frames its action, and you know it's amazing gun fights as well as like hand to hand combat, but on top of that, you know, basically I just really love the world. You know, as I mentioned before, like stuff like the Continental, you know the high table, all these little type of things really makes and establishes a built up world, and you want to see more of it. You know, and you know I just love exploring more about it and explore more about John Wick's past, about where he came from. He's like Romanian, so technically he's a JoJo, which is kind of funny.
That is funny.
That is pretty funny. But yeah, there's so many amazing great things in this film. And you know even the kind of villain of this film, which I forgot his name, but he's like the bald Asian guy. Great performance by him, where it's like funny but also
Mm-hmm.
scary. So yeah, that's why I recommend John Wick, and that's why it's my number 6.
Yeah. So my number 5 is Alita Battle Angel.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you know, again, we're trying to. It's like the same kind of movies, it's just like in different orders here and there. But yeah, like you know, Alita Battle Angel. It's just a really like excellent film. You know, again, like a lot of these films, I don't know if it is just like a niche that needs to be scratched for me, which is like just having like a very simple plot. But then executing the plot really well. Like again, like you know, Alita is a an artificial intelligence robot that is kind of a survivor of like a great war, but it's like not, it's kind of like plays background to like her being like a fish out of water, and trying to figure out like you know what's going on in the world that she's living in, and how she wants more from. Again, it's been a long time since I've seen the OVA, so I don't remember how one for one it is, but the parts that I do remember of it, is like it's very much the same.
Yeah, my
I'd
whole
love
thing
to
was
see.
like there's a bit with the dog, and I'm just like, I'm gonna do the dog thing, and they actually did the dog thing. I'm like, okay, they did
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, and so like a lot of the action, a lot of the CGI, like I remember seeing like the behind the scenes stuff. Like it's so cool, like just how they managed to make everything so fluid, and do such a good job with this film. That's been would have otherwise been considered something that's been in like what is it like creative hell or whatever it's called, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's
like they're
been there
never
for like
gonna make
10
this
plus
movie.
years. Like it was like we want to make it, but there's no time, and
Yeah.
there's a passion
But then
project
they
basically. Yeah.
but then they actually did it. So yeah, Alita Battle Angel, it's very, very good. Highly recommend watching it. And yeah, again, it shows that we can have these action films with like female like leads in it.
Not only that, but
That's
also anime ones and yeah, because
anime ones, yeah,
anime
sure,
ones
that
as
one's
well,
it.
guys. Come on, like the anime. That's the next breaking thing aside from comic books and video games. Anime.
Actually, just as a side note, did you hear about how like an anime like hentai avatar girl is doing is like the number one most watched on like this live cam website, and all the like other live cam girls are like getting salty over the fact that people are sending this like avatar girl all their money. Like I just find it hilarious.
2D/3D waifus for life, guys.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. Like that's where what the money seems to be going to. So I find it hilarious. But yeah, what's your number five?
My number five is Parasite, aka the film that
Oh,
won the Oscar this year. I think it did really great job. Obviously the director is Bong Joon Ho. He did Snowpiercer, which I also really really love. He did Okja, which is a very different and odd film. Basically, he has a very particular tone in his films. And a lot of it is actually class warfare, not only just in Parasite, but as well as the rest of his films as well. I think he has a particular
mhm,
theme that he likes to come back over and over again. And obviously, since it's more close to heart because it is based in Korea and how Koreans place themselves. From my understanding is, basically in South Korea, you have the extremely rich people, they have all the brands, they have all the fashion, they get all the plastic, what do you call it, surgery to make themselves like look particular way, and then and it's basically a little middle class, and then it's the rest are just really poor. And I think this movie came out kind of at I guess the right kind of time, for Koreans and things like that. So yeah, it's just amazing acting from basically, as far as I know, no names. I'm not quite sure if they've done anything, but really amazing acting. Really great framing of the house, because majority of this film is set in kind of one house, and
mhm.
you really get an understanding of where things are placed. So it does really well understanding of where the camera work is. And I really like the story of kind of essentially kind of this poor family working for a rich family, without them knowing that they're hiring everyone in that one family. And then, much like a lot of different of these types of films, there's obviously a twist that definitely won't spoil, but there's things happen, and it basically turns into another type of film. And I think the genius of Parasite is that it switches from one type of genre of film to another type of genre. So it tends to like a horror thriller, to kind of like a heist film almost. Like it kind of moves to place to place to place, and it doesn't feel disjointed at all, and it flows really well. So that's why Parasite is my number 5 film of the year.
Yeah, so Parasite's actually my number four. So yeah, like again, like you said, the film does an excellent. Like, again, it's a foreign film. For a long time I was kind of really skeptical, like, is it really as good as saying it? Like maybe overhyping it, but like after watching it, it's like I get it. I get why people like this film. I think the main line of family, like the main like essentially it is a lot like you said about like class warfare, and about how the poor, like the rich looking down at the poor trying to do the best that they can in the situation they're in, like like the entire family are open to doing like underhanded things in order to get ahead in life, in order to get an advantage, because that's what you have to do when you're in that like, kind of stage in your life. And in a way, I think like a lot of people can kind of sympathize with that. And so while they're not good people, you can understand like why they made the decision that they did throughout this film. And then, like you said, like kind of midway through the film, like there's like a big twist that happens, and it just kind of like shakes up the entire movie in terms of, you know, like how are the characters going to get out of this? What does that mean in the grand scheme of like the plot? But then it's also like related to you know, what happens with how their interactions with certain characters are. Like, you know, I totally didn't get this initially, but someone pointed out like at the very beginning, like the father has like he's really annoyed at these like stink bugs that like kind of like, you know, smell up the whole place, and he like flicks them away. But then later on in the film, he gets like kind of behind his back, being called as someone who like smells really badly. So that's kind of like a kind of cross play with like some of the themes in the films of how people like perceive people. So yeah, highly recommend Parasite. Really, really cool. Really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. My number four film of 2019 is The Irishman, which is Martin Scorsese's. I wouldn't say magnum opus. You know, basically, Scorsese has so many really great films. It's kind of hard to kind of place, you know, his best film. You know, people say Goodfellas. You know, others say Taxi Driver. Basically, he's just a master of his craft. And this film is sitting at 3.5 hours. And it's well worth the watch. Especially of like these kind of crime dramas, as mentioned before, like Goodfellas, Casino, and things like that. So a lot of this is just kind of like based on semi real life events, and basically top performances from everyone. You know, from because most of the time you get people like Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. Most of the time these days they kind of phone it in with a lot of films. But you know they're committed to this film. Even people like Ray Romano gets a like he actually acts really well in this film. And it just follows kind of the rise of not only, you know, Robert De Niro's character Frank, rise up through the ranks, I guess, of kind of this crime kind of semi family and group, but as well as, you know, you know, this basically feels like a good send off to all these types of action crime dramas, as mentioned before, because Scorsese is the master at it. You don't really get many of them anymore, you know. But essentially, this feels like this is kind of like because you see something like Goodfellas and Casino and all these types of films. You know, you see people like Joe Pesci, and you know Al Pacino and things like that at their prime. You know, they're very young. You know, they you know, and they're kind of reliving these events. And this is kind of like what you see. You don't really see this at any gangster type film. Is that, you know, they're basically old. You know, they you know, they're in their 50s and 60s. So like it progresses from them when they were relatively young all the way to when they're old, and it kind of gives a full whole story of, and it basically start, middle, and end. And that's why it's a really good cap off of all those types of films. And you know, it explores something that you don't really see much in these these crime films, as mentioned before, of like what is it to be like when you're 60, 70 years old and you're still living the crime kind of life, and how is that going to affect your family, and how, and you know definitely you don't have the physicality as you once did before. So I feel like definitely Irishman tops as number four. Basically Scorsese, master of his craft, and well deserved.
Nice. Yeah, my number three is Spider-Man: Far From Home. Really like the film. Disney continues to do a really good job with the Marvel property, especially Spider-Man. Again, Spider-Man usually has like the best villains in the MCU, kind of like the Batman, right? Like in the MCU, his villains are usually very much like creative, and they do a really good job with Mysterio, and then kind of having him be like a good guy, but then doing a really good twist in like kind of organically incorporating him into the MCU, while also doing a really excellent job with the kind of scenes where he does have like the illusions, and is projecting them onto Spider-Man and various other people. The stakes are getting higher, and it kind of sets up for a really cool third and final act. I don't know what's going to be the case with Marvel going forward after the third Spider-Man movie, but yeah, it's a really good, you know, kind of addition to the Spider-Man mythos and movies in the MCU. So yeah, that's my number three.
Good number three. My number three is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Tarantino, probably not his best, as I mentioned before, but it is a really good take on, I guess, Hollywood, and I guess the transition of Hollywood between the 60s and 70s. And essentially the main part of this is because around the 60s and 70s there was a transition of Hollywood for things to be a little bit more like family friendly and things like that, and then the kind of horror of like the 70s, and you'd have more slasher films. Psycho came out in like 1960s, and you really got more of that slasher vibe. You had this I guess like, because before horror films used to be, for example, like it used to be like monsters like Godzilla or the Blob, and then like within that 60s and early 70s they started to explore like the horror could be your neighbor. And I feel like explaining that kind of backstory, and kind of scenery of kind of of where this film is kind of placed, kind of gives a little bit more background, because part of this film is the kind of the Manson cult, and how that's kind of how it affected people living around that time, and it kind of scared people, where it's like, yeah, these people, you think that they're your neighbors, you think that they're nice people, however inside you don't know who they are. And I feel like that is basically the general premise of this film, because for example, like DiCaprio plays a character called Rick Dalton, who's kind of like this action kind of star in this bounty law type of show, but really inside he's a very vulnerable person. He's a person who has a lot of flaws, and he needs help from a lot of people, including his best friend, Cliff Booth, which is his friend Brad Pitt, who basically is his rock, and is what he's personified of what he is in the movies, and it's kind of like a good role reverse, and I feel like those two really play well on each other, and it just kind of shows like this is Tarantino's version of what Hollywood is. There's a lot of things where it speculates on, for example, Brad Pitt's character is, I forgot the exact guy, but I think in the 70s, forgot what it was, but the wife got killed off a boat accident, and that's basically supposed to be Brad Pitt's character, all the way to Margot Robbie's version of Sharon Tate, which in real life she does die, but in this movie she obviously she's alive, and it has a really great action set piece right at the end, but yeah, it just shows that really great cast, and I think it does some amazing things in this film that I feel like it's one of those films that you probably want to rewatch and then really dissect what's going on, because I think a lot of it escapes people's, I guess, minds when it comes to watching this film.
Yeah, cool. So my number two is Avengers Endgame. It's a combination of like 10 plus years of like Marvel films, and the thing is they kind of did like the whole time travel plot, but I think they did it in an excellent way. And having all the characters come back and kind of try and save everything, and then ultimately have again, like Thanos being like the main villain, in an excellent job once again. Having all the characters come back for one last hurrah, and closing off the series. Like I can almost kind of not watch another Marvel film again. Not going to happen. I'm going to continue watching it probably. But yeah, it was an excellent way to kind of close off like the superhero genre, let alone just the MCU as a whole. And just goes to show that all these kind of films do have a place, and continue to do really well, financially and as films as a whole. Even though some people don't like to consider them, artistic film. But yeah, Endgame,
Cinema,
really, really good.
people say.
Yeah, cinema, you could say, yes. But yeah, Avengers Endgame, really, really. Obviously, people who aren't really as invested in kind of the MCU genre of film may not appreciate it as much, which is understandable. It's not something that's supposed to be seen independently, like something like a Parasite is, right? But what the movie kind of opens up as, and what it means in terms of having almost like a movie serial, a continuation, a continuity that everybody can follow and continue with, is set that kind of thing up so that people try to imitate it, poorly nonetheless, but it does. And so I think it's really, really good. It closes off everything. Acting is great, characters are great. Yeah. So that's my number two.
Mm-hmm. Good choice. My number two is 1917, and we're using the American rules, which means it has to be released in 2019, because over here it was released this year in 2020 in January. But yeah, this film, I haven't had a full review yet because we've just been really busy doing stuff. But this film basically deserves the hype that it gets. It was basically like, I kind of wish this did win Best Picture, because a lot of this film is just, there's so much in this film that is just right, and everything that I love about cinema. Um,
Mhm.
the plot is a very basic plot of basically these two soldiers. They get a kind of mission to be like, hey, we're stopping this fighting on the front. So basically, you need to get to one side of kind of no man's land to the other side of no man's land and call off the attack before it's too late. And that's kind of, it starts this journey of these two soldiers basically going through the horrors of what war is like, and going through no man's land by themselves. Because most of the time you get war movies, you get a whole platoon or a group of people. But this one, it makes it very personalized, just with two characters, and just trying to get to one side to the other side. The amazing thing about this film is, and obviously it's a semi gimmick, but I love my gimmick films, and I especially like this gimmick, is it is shot in one take. Now, it's officially not shot in one take, but it's really made.
It's like a pseudo one take.
It's a pseudo made to look like it's done in one take, but it's done really well. Like, for example, something like in Birdman, it kind of sort of shakes. There's a lot of different films where they do. You can kind of see where they mask it. I think in this film they do a amazing job on masking its one takeness. Obviously, and cinematography is also amazing, and something got to do with that. And obviously, they got the master Roger Deakins. He did Blade Runner. He does Sicario. He's basically the best cinematographer that has ever existed, basically, to kind of do this. And it's done really well. I really feel for these characters as well, and I feel like doing it in one take, and kind of personalizing the story really makes you feel for these characters that you really don't get in many films. And you feel you're always there with the characters. There's no cuts, type of thing, where it's like you are kind of there with that character, and you're experiencing everything kind of one to one. And basically, this is what kind of what is it? Dunkirk tried to be, where tried to make it feel intense and kind of personalized. And I feel like it never really got to that point. But 1917 does. And there's amazing set pieces where I was shocked that they must have done it in like a few takes or one take. But there's so many amazing things happen. Like, there's these trenches. They must have built all the trenches. And there's obviously a scene where there's ruins, and it's done at nighttime, and these flares go up. And it's probably the most amazing, probably beautiful scene of all of 2019 cinema. And yeah, I feel like out of all the different types of war films, this is something very different and very unique. And I think it very much should be applauded for. And hats off to Sam Mendes. Basically, probably got sick of James Bond and started to do, this is probably his passion project. And, you can definitely see that, what is it, that one scene in, not Skyfall, Spectre, at the start of the movie, where, James Bond is at the Day of the Dead parade. That was all kind of done in one take as well. So he must have had this kind of idea to be like, hey, I can probably do a movie done in one take. And I think that's probably the origins of this film. And apparently a lot of this film, which I didn't know until I read up on it until the end of the story as well, that this is kind of based off a true story that he heard from, I think, his like great granddad or whatever it may be. So this is a story that kind of semi happened in real life. And yeah, I just really like these stories, these two characters going through this journey, and so that's why it is my number 2 film of the year.
Cool. Yeah, I guess we can both say our number 1 at the same time. 3, 2, 1. Joker.
It's Dora the Explorer, the movie.
Oh yeah, no, I watched it. I was gonna say Cats initially, but
yeah, Joker's number 1.
Yeah,
surprise, I guess.
I don't think it's. I think for the general, like, your average layman person, and just even if you're like a critic, people have loved this movie. It's obviously got a lot of flack about, I don't know, cinema shootings and shit, but it was all unfounded.
Nothing happened,
obviously.
By the way. Just gonna put that out there.
Yeah, again, it was just fear mongering. The movie it does an excellent job at kind of exploring the human condition, exploring mental health, exploring the oppression that happens through like kind of class issues with the rich and the poor. It does an excellent job at kind of reimagining exactly what the Joker is, and what his origin is. What the perspective of like the Wayne family is. It flips like the traditional Batman kind of mythos and does something unique and new about it, all through the acting of our best our new best actor, Joaquin Phoenix, right? He does an excellent job at portraying the role that he's in, and yeah, it's like the second time I think an actor has won best actor for the same role, right? It's like I think it happened in another instance, I think, but I think it's like the second time. So it's really cool to see that he's gotten the recognition that he has because it's in a film that uses his acting chops to its fullest. So yeah, I recommend Joker. It's like whether or not you're a comic book fan or not, you'll really get a kick out of this film.
Yeah, and I feel like it amazing performance, and I feel like this film means not only a lot to like, obviously it has the same type of themes as kind of like a Parasite, for example, like class warfare, but it does so many other things as well on top of that, and even then it's not necessarily 100% clear because the Joker a lot of the times does say in this film that like he didn't start like he started this kind of movement, but he doesn't care about politics. He's just one guy, and he's just doing his own kind of thing, and he just sparked this thing, and is ahead of it without knowing it or not. But I feel like there's so many amazing things out in this film, like the cinematography, soundtrack, as I mentioned before, which won best soundtrack, performances, and I feel like this is kind of a culmination of you wouldn't get this kind of film if for example, the Marvel films didn't exist. I was watching a lot of kind of interviews with Todd Phillips, and things like that, and it's clearly that like he wanted to make this film very different from the Marvel films, and I'm glad that at least Warner Brothers gave him the permission to do so. A personalized story, a character study, which once again I will champion any film that is in the comic book genre that does a character study. Marvel really hasn't done it yet, aside from Logan, but that was Fox, and maybe in the future of MCU, maybe they'll do one of these. I am not quite sure, but this film will stand the test of time, I think. And the Joker performance is up there with Heath Ledger and a lot of those types. And now we've got competing Jokers of which one's the best one. Which it's just an amazing film. And it really just shows that Joaquin Phoenix really wanted to make this role, because I do remember Joaquin Phoenix was actually considered, I think, twice for 2 comic book films. I think he was actually considered for Doctor Strange at one point, and he was
but he turned it down.
He turned it down, and I think another film as well. But it's clearly that he's an actor, and he must have seen something in this role and really made it his own. And I feel like it's basically, this is what Scorsese would say is cinema. Even though this is kind of, you could say, very close, if not nearly like a 1-for-1 type of thing of Scorsese films, but it just shows that it's kind of like the artist's vision of what they want to do with the character or do with the situation. And I think that's why I mentioned it's kind of the collaboration of all these different types of things going together. Whilst, like, for example, Marvel films, they're kind of movies done by committee. There's kind of an overarching vision for one thing. For example, like, particular characters don't have to be like, oh yeah, well, I'm gonna play it this way or that way, or what if I do this? Everything's kind of relatively structured, and basically it's the masterclass of making movies by committee, and doing it really, really well. But basically, Joker, I feel like a lot of it is one or two people's visions. Todd Phillips, as well as, I guess, Joaquin Phoenix, had a really good collaboration together, and they just really wanted to create this character and create these moments and kind of see what they can do. And that's why I'm saying they're kind of two dimes of kind of the same coin. One is complete control by the studio, and the one is complete control by the artist and who has the vision. And I'm glad that these two films exist in the exact same type of way, and both come out at the exact same time and both be also successful. So yeah, and I feel like these days, if you're not going to make movies by committee, maybe get someone who has a unique vision and idea of these characters and really give them the time of day to maybe be able to do it. I think so. That's why I think Joker is my number one film of 2019, and I feel like it really does hold a special place, and I think it really does maybe mark a turning point for, I guess, comic book films, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Especially as the first R-rated comic book film to make $1 billion. But yeah, just some special mentions of movies that I also watched. Detective Pikachu, good film. I liked it. Shaft, really funny. Toy Story 4, pretty good. And Frozen 2, like it wasn't bad, but
It wasn't
like
bad,
it
but
wasn't
it
amazing.
exists, especially from
Yeah,
like Frozen 1. Come on, guys, Frozen 1.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, my honorable mentions, as you mentioned before, Shaft was a pretty funny thing of just all the generations coming together. That's kind of cool. Shazam
Mhm.
was there. Nearly made my top 10 on that one. Crawl, which is the one that kind of hunted down, the alligator and all that type of stuff. I thought that was kind of a fun movie. I've got a lot more. I've got The King, which I thought was a pretty good slow film about what happened in the medieval ages. Ready or Not, surprising hit film, which is like up my alley of just like this girl, basically these people trying to hunt her down and kill her in a mansion throughout the whole night, and I feel like that was a really interesting plot. Hotel Mumbai, based on real events that happened in India about some terrorists going to a hotel trying to kill everyone. I thought that was a really great, amazing film as well. The Highwaymen from Netflix. Basically, it's a story about Bonnie and Clyde, but on the perspective of the police, which is really, really well done. Ad Astra, I think, is a really interesting take on, I guess, space travel and a realistic take on it. And The Dirt, which is the Motley Crue bio film. I think is done really well and really creative. So even if you're not a fan of, I guess, Motley Crue, I'd highly also suggest watching The Dirt. So yeah, I think I had a lot of basically honorable mentions where they were good but not great. I think like 7 out of 10 type of things. I think that's
Mhm.
what majority of 2019 was, especially for me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of films that I still need to watch. Like a lot of the ones that made your top list, like I still needed to watch. Like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 1917, Irishman, Uncut Gems as well. And then I don't know if I'll end up watching it, but there's like Glass, and there was also like Ford versus Ferrari. Like
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I want to watch Ford
I don't know
versus
if I'll.
Ferrari, and I did watch Glass, and I don't know if you want to play it out that way, but I got a feeling that you probably won't like it. But yeah,
Yeah, probably not. But I
and
need to know more about the unbreakable cinematic universe. Damn it! But yeah,
yeah,
but yeah, no. As for me, like yeah, I'll probably have to watch more films this year and catch up to it. Another year, another set of movies.
another year, another set of movies, and we're already midway through Feb. But yeah, that will be us for this week. Remember, you can always listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Libsyn, and our YouTube channel, Marketing Movies, where we live stream. So until next time, maybe Henry Cavill can win best Oscar, like best actor at one point. But until next time, see ya.
Catch